The blizzard was a freaking whirlwind, slamming against the walls of this gloomy castle. There was a table by the window, and on it, a tiny plate held a sandwich, made of 2 slices of stale bread and some jam. Walking over, the young woman pulled a box of matches from her dress pocket and lit one up. Grabbing the plate with her food and blowing out the match, Honey wished herself a happy birthday. She was all alone in this castle, desperately trying to survive. And today, she turned 19. But even now, on this day, the people outside were hoping she'd just kick the bucket. That day was burned into her brain, leaving some seriously deep scars on her heart. Back then, Emperor Frederick ordered Honey to be transferred to Castle Mloud, but the people around thought that punishment was way too soft, remembering how her mother tried to poison the Empress. Besides, they'd lost the imperial grandson she was carrying back then. So, the people started begging His Majesty to cancel the order and reconsider the harshness of the punishment. Frederick, eyes blazing, ordered everyone to shut their traps right now, promising they'd be joining Honey in the castle if they didn't. Being locked up in the ice castle of Mloud was basically a death sentence. Frederick passed it off as a better option than executing his sister, even though she didn't even do anything. The castle, surrounded by perpetual winter, sat on top of a snowy mountain. This mountain, which used to be lush and green, froze over about 500 years ago. Back then, the emperor at the time defeated a dragon that had ice magic. As the imperial sword pierced the dragon's heart, an incredible power burst out. It froze the mountain in an instant, which led to the icing over of nearby villages and hundreds of casualties. Even after 500 years, the forest hasn't changed, preserving the horror of that incident like it was yesterday. But it wasn't enough that Honey got banished there. She somehow, unbelievably, inherited the dragon's power. The girl slumped onto the floor, seeing her life as totally screwed. If there was a god, he wouldn't let this happen. What else could she expect from a life where she couldn't feel even a drop of warmth? Putting her hand on her heart, she broke down, believing people can't live without feeling loved. And now, with the only thing she had left, she decided to commit her first sin. Conjuring up some ice clones in the air, the girl closed her eyes and got ready. A second later, lying in a pool of her own blood, she felt a pleasant warmth for the first time. And if there really is someone listening to her in this place, Honey just wished to be born somewhere that wasn't so damn cold. Suddenly, she snapped her eyes open and found herself in bed, jumping up and grabbing her head. Standing across from the bed was Honey's mom, Eleanor, who was screaming at her daughter in a rage, calling her a useless idiot. The heroine figured this was maybe her life flashing before her eyes. But why this memory? Still freaking out, the woman stomped over to the little girl's table and snatched up her music box. She smashed it on the floor, deciding that worthless trash like Honey never should have been born. The heroine sighed, totally bummed, still not getting why she had to see this of all things. The mother screamed that every time she looked at her daughter, it felt like she was walking through hell. Eleanor was an ex-empress, and even that wasn't enough for her. So she went totally off the rails. After Frederick took the throne, she was stuck, so she took all her rage out on the baby. When she was little, Honey thought it was all her fault, so she clammed up and took it, never making a peep. And now, back here again, she realized how stupid she'd been. Seeing her daughter lost in thought just made Eleanor go even more ballistic. Getting right up in her face, Mom's eyes went wild, totally consumed by rage. Slapping Honey across the face, she was stunned that even this kind of scum thought she was a joke. Right then, the girl was completely taken aback, feeling the stinging on her cheek after the blow, starting to doubt she was actually dead. Our girl suddenly felt a familiar power surging in her heart. Looking down at her hand, she saw a blue glow gently wrapping around her palm. Realizing she'd gone back in time and possessed ice magic, Honey was floored. Eleanor stood behind her, glaring at the girl, who wasn't even paying her any attention. That's when the woman decided that even a reject like her daughter was looking down on her. Looking around, Honey thought if this was her payback, it was way too harsh. Meanwhile, a little boy with golden hair and eyes was walking along the royal palace. He glanced over, and what he saw totally threw him for a loop. Not long before, Honey remembered the maids bringing in a music box, a gift from His Majesty. Eleanor thought Frederick had lost his mind, deciding to give something to the princess. Right in front of the girl, she placed that box on the table, in her room. Waiting until night and making sure everyone was asleep, Honey quietly snuck over to the gift. Turning on the box, she enjoyed the beautiful sounds she'd never heard in her entire life. And now, that gift was smashed to pieces, right before the girl's eyes. Her mother ordered her to stay silently in her room until her wounds healed, and if Hani even stuck a toe outside, she'd regret it. However, Eleanor was sure that even if her daughter wanted to, she wouldn't have the guts to leave the room. After that, she started leaving the room, leaving the girl alone with her thoughts. Henny couldn't wrap her head around why she put up with this crap, and why she still does. Eleonora, cool as a cucumber, was leaving the room when she suddenly spotted the princess dart past. In that instant, Hani shoved her mom hard, sending her sprawling and hitting the floor hard. While the woman and her servants were still reeling from the shock, the girl bolted down the hallways, screaming for help. A few seconds later, Hani heard her mother shriek behind her, ordering them to catch her. The princess's wounds were still throbbing, and she had no clue where to run. She remembered back when she lived on the snow mountain. The emperor was the only one who made sure she had everything she needed. Knowing he was the only one who could help her now, Hani cut a sharp turn towards Frederick's chambers. But out of nowhere, female hands grabbed her from all sides, sending a jolt of terror through her. The maids were stoked they finally caught the runaway princess and were ready to drag her back to their mistress. One of the maids was blown away by how fast the little girl could run, even in her condition. The kid tried to scream for help, but someone clapped a hand over her mouth, quick. The other maid reminded her that if Hani behaved, Her Highness, the former Empress, would forgive her. The heroine knew that if they dragged her away now, it was game over for sure. For a split second, the girl thought about freezing the maids solid with her powers. But she cut that thought off right there, not wanting to become a monster, even if she had the power. She tried to yell again, but the maids clamped her mouth shut and started dragging her back. Suddenly, Honey spotted a little boy around the corner, with golden hair and eyes, totally shocked by what he was seeing. It was Oswald, the current emperor's son, who could tell his dad everything, but he just stood there frozen in horror as the maids kept hauling the girl back to her room. Hani was desperate, trying to scream and beg for help, but it was no use. All she could do now was hope the kid got the message and told her dad everything. Completely drained, she was practically hanging in the girl's arms, pleading with Oswald. The boy just stared back, totally lost and confused by what was going on. The maids reported back to the lady that everything went smoothly and they didn't run into anyone. Eleanor didn't care who was snooping around, because Frederick would never find out what was happening here. She glared at her daughter, whose attempts to escape had failed miserably. What really pissed her off was that this little brat dared to shove her and run away. She had to ask, did Hani actually have the nerve to defy her? In that case, she needed to put the little pest back in her place, so she grabbed her daughter's head. But then the maids started screaming that Imperial Knights were outside, sending Eleanor into a total panic. The heroine immediately realized that kid must have ratted her out to his dad after all. Totally freaked, the woman started thinking like crazy, ordering everyone to tidy up the room, pronto! They tied up the little girl, stuffed her in the closet, and taped her mouth shut. One of the maids was ordered to watch the kid and make sure she didn't make a peep. Turning to Honey, Eleanor told her to play dead, because they still had stuff to talk about later. After that, she slammed the closet doors shut, leaving the little girl in the dark, and rushed to meet the knights. Finally arriving on the scene, the knights, led by Captain Drake, greeted Her Highness. Drake was especially happy to see that the former Empress was doing so well. Turns out, Emperor Frederick had ordered them to check on Her Highness, Princess Honey. Eleanor smirked, wondering when she and the Emperor got so chummy, they started dropping by unannounced. The captain didn't give a damn though, because he was just following the big guy's orders. She acted like she got his drift, but now wasn't the time. The princess was catching Z's after etiquette class. Drake was baffled, like, was the lady really trying to disobey a direct order from the emperor? Eleanor was pissed that they wanted her to wake up the little princess just to put her on display. The soldiers apologized, saying it was the emperor's command, but she cut them off right there. Eleanor blew up, yelling that if she wasn't empress anymore, did her words even matter at all? She refused to show the kid until Emperor Frederick himself showed up in person to ask for it. Honey heard everything from inside the closet and was praying to God for some kind of miracle. Apologizing for the disturbance, Drake and his men had no choice but to take their leave. Those words sent chills down the tied-up girl's spine. Because if the knights just leave now, the princess's life won't be any better than before. Suddenly, the emperor's booming voice echoed down the hallway, demanding to know what all the racket was about. Expecting this kind of behavior from the former empress, Frederick decided to come himself. Drake bowed, greeting His Highness, and apologizing for not being able to handle things himself. Eleanor didn't get why such a busy guy would even bother visiting them. I mean, if he just wanted to check on the princess, he could have picked another day, but the emperor refused. He came to see his little sister, plain and simple. Did he really need another reason? The girl heard him demand they bring Princess Honey to him, right now. Trying to stall, Eleanor was stunned by Frederick's insistence. especially since he hadn't come around in 9 years. So, right now, he must have had a damn good reason to insist on waking up the sleeping kid. To the woman's horror, it turned out the emperor had gotten a report that the princess was being dragged somewhere by her own maids. Looking surprised, Eleanor pretended she didn't understand what His Majesty was talking about. The maids acted like they were hearing about this for the first time and didn't know anything about it either. But Frederick just laughed in response, because he figured all the staff were in on the conspiracy. Right then and there, he ordered a search of the palace to find Her Highness, Princess Honey. The woman started screaming in terror, not understanding how they could make such a fuss over some rumors. However, the young Crown Prince Oswald considered the former Empress's words to be completely wrong, because it wasn't just rumors. He personally saw the incident happen. Eleanor froze in shock and fear, and Frederick started to get angry at his son, who had been ordered to wait and not interfere. Oswald figured since he saw it all go down first, he had to watch it play out to the end. The woman glared daggers at the high-born scumbag who dared to open his mouth. The emperor was giving Eleanor one last shot to confess everything before the knights found the kid, but the woman kept stubbornly acting like she didn't know anything, which totally enraged Frederick. The ex-empress was dead set on staying silent no matter what, come hell or high water. What's more, putting on a helpless act, she pretended she couldn't understand why the emperor was treating her like this. Out of nowhere, Oswald ordered the knights to open the cabinet in the corner, figuring the girl might be in there. Eleanor looked at him in horror, frozen solid, and feeling a cold wave of fear wash over her. Hearing everything, Honey looked hopefully at the closed door, waiting for her rescuers to show up. Suddenly, a tiny beam of light pierced the darkness inside the cabinet, shining through from outside. The door swung wide, revealing a horrifying sight. A little girl, terrified and tied up. Oswald reached out to her with a smile, welcoming the girl who had nothing left to fear. First things first, he freed her from the painful restraints and took her to her father. Honey couldn't believe her eyes, finally face to face with the emperor. But now, she was dead set on stopping the hesitation and taking action. Dropping to her knees before Frederick, the girl begged the emperor to protect her from her mother's attacks. Eleanor stared at her daughter in disbelief, not grasping how she could do this to her own mom. That was all the emperor needed to see, and he flew into a rage. His first order: the immediate arrest of the perpetrator, along with all her maids. Keeping her eyes locked on Frederick, Honey heard screams behind her as the knights moved in on the girls. Out of nowhere, Oswald walks up to the kid and gently takes her hand, totally flustering her. Once he's sure the criminals are tied up, the emperor turns his attention to the kids. He wanted them to follow him, leaving the cleanup to the knights. The girl barely gets a sigh of relief out before she hears her mom screaming like a banshee. Eleanor was shaking like crazy, totally losing it. Like her punishment wasn't enough already, she starts hurling insults at her daughter, but Drake slaps his hand over her mouth. Frederick was glad to finally see the real face of this woman, who clearly thought she was untouchable. And since she was begging for it, the emperor ordered the captain to give Eleanor a serious interrogation. Turning to the kids, he knew they were probably already traumatized and just wanted to get them out of there. After that, he reached out to Hani, wanting to pat her on the head. Startled, the girl jerked back, covered her head with her hands, and squeezed her eyes shut. Seeing that, Frederick regretted being so careless and apologized to his little sister. He never meant to hurt her, and to prove it, he draped his imperial cloak around Hani. Knowing what she'd been through, the emperor offered to carry her. Hani, still in shock, gave a hesitant nod and suddenly found herself in His Highness's arms. Afterwards, he beckoned his son, who was giving the girl a sweet smile. The father was impressed by his courage, but now they'd have to talk about the boy's reckless wanderings. Henny got help, but all this warmth coming from the emperor felt so foreign. Until now, she'd been withering away alone in the ice palace. But is this really happening? Her thoughts were interrupted by Oswald, who wondered if she was all right. Looking into his worried eyes, she felt someone actually caring about her for the first time. Burying her face in Frederick's vest to hide her embarrassment, she mumbled that she was okay. With all her heart, she hoped these kind looks wouldn't just turn out to be a fleeting dream. And right now, more than anything, she just wanted to bask in this warmth a little longer. Before long, the emperor, his sister, and his son safely arrived at the palace. Head butler Charles, along with a group of servants, greeted His Highness, the son of the empire. Immediately, the man's gaze fell upon the injured girl in the emperor's arms. Taking a close look at the little one, he immediately thought they should call the imperial physician. Nodding in agreement, Frederick also wanted to know where the empresses were at the moment. Learning they were both in the drawing room, the emperor ordered the princess to be brought there after everything was done. So, for the time being, he decided to entrust her to the palace's personal maid, a young girl named Viola, gently taking the princess in her arms. The maid greeted her and invited her to come with her. Seeing this, Oswald started begging his dad to let him go with Honey. Agreeing, Frederick knew it'd be tough getting used to those two's relationship. I mean, at first glance, they looked like two kids, but Honey was actually Oswald's aunt. Watching them go, the Emperor informed Charles that things were going to be a little crazy around the palace for a while. He thought Eleanor was hiding the girl because she was overprotective, but it turned out to be way worse. Later, arriving in the living room, Frederick was greeted by his mother, Constance, and his wife, Melissa. Both empresses were super worried since they couldn't find Oswald anywhere, but instead of explaining, the Emperor wanted to discuss something with them. Meanwhile, Viola got the kids to the room where the princess would be examined by the doctor later. Settling into a chair, Honey looked in the mirror and figured she was about 9 years old right now. She remembered that broken music box she'd secretly turn on when everyone was asleep. In those moments, she'd imagined growing up in a happy family, full of love and harmony, just like Oswald, whose parents actually cared about him and looked out for him. Suddenly, Honey noticed the boy staring at her wounds. Feeling a little embarrassed, she apologized to him, totally throwing the crown prince for a loop. Oswald was confused. Had the heroine done something wrong? The girl was sure he was shocked to see something he wasn't supposed to see. Then, instead of accepting the apology, the boy demanded that his aunt thank him for saving them. Those were his mother's words, and being a dutiful and good son, he remembered them well. The heroine got a little flustered by that, giving Oswald a good, hard look. Blushing and covering her mouth, she thanked the hero for saving her. A little unsure, but totally genuine. The boy's face suddenly changed, lighting up with this excited, almost manic look. Looking at him, Honey thought, if light could somehow gather itself and become a person, this is exactly what he'd look like. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and a woman's voice asked if she could come in. Oswald gave the okay, and Agnes, the Imperial healer, walked into the room. The heroine could hardly believe she was seeing one of the Empire's top 3 doctors in the flesh. In her past life, it was Agnes who saved the Empress after Eleanor poisoned her. Much to the healer's regret, His Highness had to leave the premises. It was necessary for the procedure, and she hoped the Crown Prince would understand. As he and Viola left, Oswald told Agnes not to bully the heroine. Sitting across from the kid and putting on gloves, the healer began examining her hands. A normal kid would have been squirming and crying from the pain, but Honey just winced a little. Agnes was super surprised and figured that's how the girl dealt with everything. When they were done, the princess's hands were completely bandaged. The girl suddenly wondered if she should show her the scars under her clothes, which shocked the doctor. Honey knew the woman needed to report her condition to His Highness. Agnes wondered how the little girl knew about her mission, but the kid just guessed. Still, she was really grateful to the Emperor for worrying about her and saving her from her mom. Honey figured if she wanted a decent future, she had to show all the scars the palace left her with. Agnes was practically in shock, staring at the princess's trembling hands. The girl hesitantly started unbuttoning her dress, barely managing to keep her hands from shaking. Unable to watch, the woman grabbed her hands, totally throwing the princess off. But the healer just wanted to help the young princess get her clothes off. After checking out the scars on Her Highness's body, Agnes wrote in her report that the princess was regularly abused. After getting the help she needed, the girl finally went out to Oswald and Viola, who were waiting for her. The boy instantly wanted to know how everything went and if she was okay. More than anything, he needed to know if the healer had hurt her. That's when Honey reassured him, telling him that because of him, it didn't hurt at all. For Oswald, this was priority 1, and he suggested they head to his dad's right away. Stepping into the living room, the heroine instantly felt the oppressive weight hanging in the air. No surprise there. The Emperor had probably already spilled the beans to the Empresses. As she sat on the couch, all the girl wanted to know was if everyone really believed her. First things first, Frederick admitted that they'd already read Agnes's report on her condition. Because of that, the Emperor wanted to personally thank the little one for her bravery. Since he was there himself, an investigation was pointless. But they still needed proof to strip Eleanor of her title. Melissa jumped in, thinking that they were all gathered there to hear from the princess. The Empress wanted the girl to tell them herself everything that had happened to her. Gathering her courage, the heroine told them about all the torment her mother put her through, killing her will to live. Living under the thumb like that every single day, she snapped and tried to run, but they caught her. Frederick totally lost it when he heard that. Why didn't the kid just ask for help in the first place? But then it hit him. It was their job to figure this crap out for themselves. She remembered her mom calling her a disgusting monster, saying nobody loved her and nobody would help. And even if Honey told the Emperor everything, it wouldn't matter. She was the daughter of his sworn enemy. That's why she couldn't ask for help, which just left Frederick completely speechless. Constance just grabbed her head. She was in total shock after hearing all this. The emperor started beating himself up for not suspecting anything when Eleanor's maids were lying to his face. Right now, he barely felt worthy of asking for forgiveness for not figuring things out sooner. Oswald ran over and hugged Honey tight, crying as he said her name. He didn't think of her as a monster at all. On the contrary, he called the people who hurt her that. But now, he promised the princess, point blank, that she wouldn't feel pain anymore. She couldn't hold it in and just burst into tears on his shoulder, finally feeling safe. Melissa came and sat next to them, giving them a big hug, totally backing her son up. Looking at the girl, the Empress realized it must have been incredibly tough for her to cope all alone. Constance decided it was time to stop cutting Eleanor any slack just because of her kid. Everyone agreed, and now they had to decide what punishment the woman deserved. At that moment, the kids were sound asleep on the couch, finally done with all the drama. After a while, Honey opened her eyes and found herself in a soft bed, in a room she didn't recognize. At the same time, on the other side of the bed, Oswald was stretching, having just woken up himself. The princess squeezed out of him that they were currently in his father's chambers. Suddenly, Honey noticed the boy's eyes were seriously puffy. Oswald just smirked back, because the kid's eyes weren't looking any better. There was a short pause, and then the heroes burst out laughing their heads off. The girl felt like she'd just woken up after a long-ass winter. Outside the window, new shoots were blooming, signaling that spring was finally here. Meanwhile, back in the dungeon, a guard was trying to shut up the chattering maids accused of helping Eleanor. They insisted they were innocent, claiming they were only doing what their mistress told them. One of them, bawling, was ready to spill every single detail of everything that went down. Standing next to the guard was Frederick, who was looking at a cell in the distance with disgust. There she was, Her Highness, the former Empress Eleanor, sitting in silence with her head bowed. All the maids were talking about how cruel she was, so the emperor wanted to get her side of the story, but she wasn't saying a word, just occasionally glancing at Frederick with these crazy eyes. The news about Eleanor's abuse spread like wildfire all over the palace and beyond. Frederick knew that, being the former empress, she was always going to be the center of attention, but he needed a solid reason to strip her of her title and hand down the appropriate punishment. What really worried the emperor, though, was how Hani would react to all this. So he called her to his office, and she showed up, escorted by Oswald. Taking a good look at the girl, Frederick had something he needed to tell her. Folding his hands, the emperor confessed that he was planning to execute Eleanor. The girl was floored when she heard the exact same sentence that her mom got in her past life. Back then, the woman tried and failed to poison the emperor's mother, Constance. After that went down, Eleanor and her kid were locked up in a separate palace, and they'd been living there ever since. But then, the woman tried to poison Melissa too, and this time she succeeded, which is why she got the death penalty. And her daughter, Honey, got locked away in an ice palace on a snowy mountain, where she lived out the rest of her days. Now, Eleanor's punishment was just as harsh as before, except this time, it was because of the kid. Seeing her expression, Frederick rushed to clarify that the little girl wasn't to blame for any of this. I mean, on top of everything, her mom already tried to poison Constance, so it was time for her to face the music. The main character knew the emperor was worried about her, scared she'd blame herself for her mother's death. But Honey had been preparing for this since she got here and didn't feel guilty at all. So, she looked His Highness straight in the eye and told him she was totally fine. Frederick was thrown by her firm answer, and that look, way too mature for a kid. That's when he dropped the bomb. The woman was stripped of her title and would be executed in 2 days. Then the little one wondered if her mom would even admit she'd been mistreating her. Turns out, Eleanor denied everything, claiming she was completely innocent. The maids were exposed too, each blaming the other, hoping to save their own skins. They'd face serious punishment as well. And hearing that, Honey decided to obey His Majesty's orders. Bowing, she was eternally grateful to the emperor for saving her. Frederick then told her to lift her head, saying he'd only done what he should have done ages ago. It blew his mind that even though he and Oswald were the same age, the girl seemed so grown up. It hit him then. His kid was still calling the heroine by her first name. Even though they were the same age, Hani was Frederick's sister, which meant Oswald should be calling her aunt. But the kid was having none of it. He wanted to be on a first-name basis. The dad didn't mind, but told him to ask the princess herself for permission. He looked at her, eyes shining, hoping Her Highness would say yes. Turns out, almost nobody actually used his name. They just called him Crown Prince. Only a select few got to use his name, and Honey was one of them. So Oswald was really hoping for a go-ahead. Squinting at the kid's blindingly bright aura, the heroine decided he could get away with anything. Hearing her say yes and seeing his son's overjoyed face, Frederick chuckled. Unable to contain himself, Oswald threw himself at the girl, wrapping her in a big, warm hug. 2 days later, the execution day finally arrived. and the kids were just chilling in their room, reading books. According to Charles, His Highness ordered the heroes to stay inside the palace until this whole thing blows over. I mean, no sane adult's gonna let kids watch something that gruesome, right? So even though it bummed her out, the heroine knew it was the right call. But then, Oswald slammed his book shut and told Honey to come with him. You could see it all over her face. She was dying to see this woman get executed, even though they're not supposed to go anywhere near the execution site. The little crown prince knew a loophole. He held out his hand to the little girl, hoping she'd trust him, deciding to worry about the consequences later. Honey agreed and took his hand. Quietly cracking open the door, the kids slipped out and stealthily headed for the exit. Out of nowhere, a guy's voice boomed from behind us, surprised to see us there. It was Captain Drake, the Emperor's right-hand man. A total badass. Turns out, Oswald totally knew Drake would be here. No surprise there. And now, the kid wants Drake himself to escort them to the palace gates. Of course, the captain refused. But this wasn't exactly a freebie request. See, the Crown Prince knew all about how Drake smashed the Emperor's favorite vase 6 months ago. Everyone thought Melissa did it. And those words sent the captain into full-blown panic mode. The kid overheard it all during a conversation between Drake and the Empress, just happening to walk by. Oswald's mom made that vase for his dad, and he wouldn't let anyone get away with breaking it, not even the right-hand man. And Drake tried to hide behind the Empress? That just blew the captain's mind even more. After that, the captain of the Knights gave the kids a pleading look. The little girl gave him the same look back, just wanting to watch the execution from a distance. The young captain was surprised by how desperately the young princess was begging him. A little later, some maids were hanging out in the courtyard when they heard footsteps and turned around. They were shocked to see Drake carrying the kids, knowing they weren't allowed to leave the palace. Oswald was grateful to him, promising to keep their secret safe, no matter what. Around the same time, the 2nd Division Knights were leading the criminals to the execution platform. Suddenly, our heroes heard the Emperor's voice, wondering what the heck they were doing there. He distinctly remembered ordering the kids to stay put, so he demanded an explanation from the captain. Drake froze up, broke out in a sweat, and stammered, trying to say something. Right then and there, the 2nd Division started cheering for the Empire's son, His Majesty Frederick. Eleanor was taken aback, hearing the Emperor was nearby, and she glanced his way. Suddenly, she spotted her daughter, standing there all calm, just staring at her. Startled, Frederick instantly shielded the little one, which kinda confused her. In that instant, a torrent of curses and insults poured from Eleanor's mouth, aimed at the girl. The woman couldn't believe the royal family would ever love her after she betrayed her own mother. Now Eleanor knew for sure she should have gotten rid of that ungrateful monster right away. Listening to the threats and insults, the heroine suddenly realized those words didn't scare her anymore. Looking at her broken and miserable mother, Honey just couldn't believe she'd caused her so much suffering. That kind of reaction from the woman was exactly why the Emperor didn't want them meeting. He barked orders to get the soldier moving toward the scaffold and to get that bitch out of his sight. But then, Eleanor just dropped to the ground, catching the knights totally off guard. She bit one of the soldiers on the hand and screamed for them to let her go. Right now, the other knights dragged her along, ignoring her non-stop cursing aimed at Honey. The woman cursed her own daughter, figuring she'd be tossed aside like trash someday too, and she was glad Honey was gonna see the execution, because Eleanor figured the girl was headed for the same end. Just then, Drake shoved a rag in her mouth, which stunned everyone. Did these guys seriously forget how to gag a raving lunatic? Holding Honey's hand, Oswald wanted her to know not to take her mother's words to heart. The girl looked at the Crown Prince, confused and unsure what to say. But pulling herself together, she stated firmly that this woman's words wouldn't get to her anymore. Eleanor stared in shock as the girl calmly said goodbye. Honey stood there until her mother passed through the main gates and disappeared from sight. As her figure shrank with each step, the heroine's emotions vanished too. Frederick figured the 2nd Templar should get back to training, and Drake volunteered to deliver the message. However, the Emperor thought the captain was no exception either, which he resignedly agreed to. Henny worried about him, but Oswald was calm, knowing his father's leniency towards Drake. Then, the Emperor reminded them that now was not the time to be worrying about others. He was also very keen to hear the excuses of the children who had disobeyed orders. Hearing that they had to prepare, Hani immediately closed her eyes, thinking she was about to get hit. But Frederick walked up to her and gently ruffled her hair before stepping back. After sending the kids to the palace with Drake, the Emperor headed for the gates, marching towards his execution. Henny watched him go for a while, rubbing the spot on her head where he'd touched her. Back at the palace, the kids were stuffing their faces with sweets, and Oswald offered her a cookie. Henny still couldn't believe all this was actually happening to her. The idea that she'd come back from the dead and things were working out so well just felt Weird. Lost in thought, she didn't even notice Oswald carefully take her hand. Snapping out of it, Hani looked at the crown prince, hoping all this wasn't for nothing. Seeing her distant look, the boy decided to find out what was bugging her. Turns out, she just wasn't completely sure this wasn't all a dream. So Hani didn't want to bother Oswald, figuring she just needed to get used to things. Then, with a determined look, the crown prince decided there was something she needed to always remember. And that was they were family, and Oswald loved her like crazy. Hani was surprised he called her family, but the kid was dead serious. So she had nothing to worry about, because all the fears in her head would never come true. Not sure she deserved this, the little one needed to know. Did he really think of her as family? That question cracked Oswald up, because they'd been family since day one. But seeing her reaction, he figured maybe this whole family thing was upsetting Hani. But it was the total opposite, and she felt genuinely happy hearing him say that. Suddenly, Charles walked in, greeting the kids, and hoping they had a good rest. The butler was hoping to borrow Sir Drake for a sec, wanted to chat about something. Hearing them whispering outside, the kids figured they were probably talking executions. After a bit, Drake finally came back, looking super confused. Turns out, the execution ceremony was over, and His Majesty would be heading back to the palace any minute now. By his face, she could tell the captain was holding something back, but she didn't press him. Instead, she decided to apologize to Sir Drake for all the trouble. Grinning and dropping to one knee, the captain earnestly asked her to just call him by his name from now on. Besides, no need to apologize. It was a fair deal, and now they gotta keep his secret. Grinning ear to ear, the girl promised she wouldn't breathe a word about his secret. When the Emperor gets back, the captain's gonna be hauling sandbags on the training grounds. As for the kids, they'd have to face Frederick's wrath. But Oswald decided he'd protect Hani. But the heroine wasn't having any of that. Thinking she needed to take responsibility, right along with everyone else. Seeing her resolve, the crown prince decided to offer the girl something that could actually help. Drake watched in amazement as the two kids whispered about something with super serious expressions. The heroine was floored by what she heard, but Oswald believed she was the only one who could handle it. And if they did everything just like he said, their dad definitely wouldn't be able to scold and punish them so badly. Henny wasn't really seeing the point though, nervously biting her lip. Right then, a maid showed up, inviting the kids to an audience with the king. The heroes were caught off guard by how quickly things were moving, freezing in place. The Emperor was waiting for them in his study, giving the newcomers a terrifying look. He was hoping Oswald and Hani would at least try to apologize for disobeying orders. The atmosphere was heavy, and the girl, swallowing hard, stepped forward. First thing she did was confess she just wanted to see her mom one last time. Hani figured that was the only way she could truly grasp she was finally free from the cruelty and violence. Now came the moment Oswald mentioned, and the crown prince signaled her to go ahead. Putting her hands together and widening her eyes, the girl wondered if the Emperor was going to punish her. The tension in the air was so thick, the heroine couldn't even twitch. Judging by Frederick's stern face, it was clear this whole thing had backfired spectacularly. But suddenly, the Emperor decided not to scold the kids, which blew their minds. Instead, he decided to punish the girl by reaching out towards her. Henny saw that and heard what he said, and she totally freaked out, freezing up again. Hunched over, eyes squeezed shut, she was trembling, waiting for the hammer to drop. He put his hand on her head and ruffled her hair again, totally throwing her for a loop. The punishment? Frederick was gonna pat her head whenever he felt like it, no warning. The Emperor was also hoping the little tyke would get used to it, like sooner rather than later. Since it was getting dark, he decided to let the kids go, which sent Oswald, Hani, and Drake into instant happy mode. But Frederick only meant the children, 'cause the captain still had to stick around for a bit. I mean, didn't they have stuff to talk about, like when did Drake get so damn fresh? The captain acted like everything was cool, especially around Hani, but things were seriously not okay. He was the commander of the Knights, which made him look way older and more worn out than he should. So right now, the last thing he wanted to do was hit the training grounds. He decided to pull a Hani and try batting his eyelashes, but for some reason, it didn't work. That pissed off the Emperor, because Drake was a grown man and should know better. So Frederick ordered him to grab the sandbags and get his ass back to the training field. The news of Eleanor's death threw the whole palace into chaos, and Hani was glad she found out so soon. No wonder Sir Drake came back that day with a weird look on his face. The people killed her before the execution, stoned her to death. Her end wasn't much different from her last life, when the people revolted against her for trying to poison Constance. She was a generous empress who cared about her people, even after her husband died. Now, the situation's completely different than it was in the previous life. Since Hani exposed the abuse before the attempt on Melissa's life, society genuinely sympathized with her. The kid knew it was all gonna blow up the second her ice powers were exposed. As long as people were freaked out by magic, she wouldn't get away with this. Still, her new room was decked out with new stuff, which meant the royals genuinely cared about her. The heroine wondered if she'd actually gotten used to having a family now. With these people always around, she was starting to get her hopes up again, even though she knew better. That's why she felt so guilty about hiding her powers from everyone. I mean, Frederick did get her that music box and secretly funded the ice castle where she lived. Honey decided she'd just tell him the truth, expecting either help or some kind of fallout. But it didn't even matter anymore. The girl was ready for whatever came next. The next morning, she was having a peaceful breakfast with Oswald in the royal dining hall. Honey figured that, at the end of the day, her abilities might actually be useful to Frederick as the emperor. But the main character had absolutely no idea how to actually prove she was useful. Seeing the girl's face fall, Oswald got curious. What was going on with her? She just smiled back, amazed at how the kid could pick up on every little thing. After breakfast, the crown prince headed to his lessons, promising to catch up with the princess later. Waving goodbye, the main character decided this wasn't the time to slack off. While Oswald was busy, she also had to figure out her own way to train. Suddenly, she heard the servants talking, discussing how spring was coming, because that meant they wouldn't be able to enjoy ice shavings for a while. With their salaries, they could only dream of that kind of treat in the warmer months, unless the imperial family hooked them up. Viola, who was with the kid, was surprised when she suddenly froze, but the girl had finally spotted the chance she'd been waiting for. That day, she totally threw the maids for a loop with her snap decision. The girl's first thought was, "Oh crap, what did we do wrong?" One of the maids tried to explain that if her ladyship needed anything, she could always ask them, but the girl just kept insisting that she could wash herself. The heroine finally convinced the servants she wasn't a baby anymore, and finally got her way. The maids decided to wait for the princess outside, just in case she needed something. Finally alone, Hani stepped into the middle of the bathroom and got ready. Focusing hard, she started waving her hands, unleashing icy energy. With a spell, she conjured an ice crystal in the air, radiating some serious frost. The kid realized her powers were still at the same level as her past life. This time around, she figured it'd be best to just show off her skills and prove she's useful. Problem is, being so young, she couldn't finesse the magic like she used to. Looks like our girl's gotta pay His Majesty a visit once she gets her mojo back. Still, she was stoked that she remembered what it felt like to use her powers. After that, she took a bath and came out all good to the maids waiting by the door. As they were drying her off, the maids thought it was cute she wanted to bathe herself. But even after 10 days, she was still doing it, which totally freaked them out. For the whole time, Hani went to wash up all by herself every single time. The maids figured the kid probably just didn't want to show anyone the wounds on her body. They were sure Her Highness needed time to recover from her messed up past. So, they waited patiently outside the door every time, while the little one practiced her ice magic. By the 10th day, she was controlling the ice like it was nothing, bending it completely to her will. Now everything was set, and all that was left was to tell the emperor. In her mind, she hoped Frederick would pat her head again and ruffle her hair a little. But Honey also knew that if things went south, she'd have to use her powers to make a run for it. Because the princess had already made up her mind. There was no way in hell she was going back to those snowy mountains. Eventually, she arrived at the emperor's palace, guarded by Drake and his crew. The captain was totally shocked to see the girl strolling up all alone, cool as a cucumber. He flashed her a smile, immediately figuring the princess was here to visit His Highness. Turns out, though, she also needed to tell the emperor something super important. Suddenly, Hani noticed one of the knights guarding the entrance was staring right at her. Figuring he'd smile at the kid, the knight twisted his face into this goofy grin, totally throwing her off. Freaked out by what she saw, Hani figured His Highness was probably busy and couldn't see her, but Drake was sure he didn't have that much going on, then ordered Scott to tell Frederick the princess was here. Scott was the same knight who smiled at her. Didn't he realize how much he scared her? Finally standing in front of the emperor's office door, she hesitated for a sec, then gave a clumsy knock. Getting the okay to come in, she decisively opened the door, seeing Frederick buried behind a stack of papers. Remembering Drake's words, and seeing that mountain of documents on Frederick's desk, the kid decided to come back another time. The emperor was all like, "Don't sweat it, sis. I'll wrap this up quick." No matter how swamped he was, Frederick couldn't just blow off his little sister when she came to visit. First things first, he offered her a seat at the table, which was loaded with sweets and a pot of tea. The emperor was itching to hear what his little sister wanted to talk about, but then, out of nowhere, she gets up from the table, drops to her knees, and bows to the floor. Her big request? That His Highness would let her stay in the imperial palace. Frederick was floored by the request. He figured she didn't even need to ask. It was a no-brainer she could stay. After all, the emperor was her older brother. But Honey knew she hadn't spilled the beans on one crucial detail yet. And once he hears it, he might just change his mind about letting her stay. Mustering her courage, the princess confessed she had ice-freezing powers. For a moment, the emperor just stood there, silently staring at the girl. And he wasn't sure if she should bolt now, or wait a little longer. Now, Frederick understood why his words hadn't reassured the heroine. He wondered if Eleanor knew about her ability, but she shook her head no, because right now, only 2 people knew about Hani's power, and they were both here. The heroine knew she could have kept it a secret forever, but she didn't want to repay the emperor's kindness that way. Frederick was totally chill, and what's more, he was ready to help his sister. The girl stared at him, baffled, not understanding why he was taking it so well. In turn, Frederick didn't get why she had such a distrustful look on her face. He knew keeping a power like hers, one that scared the whole empire, inside the palace walls was risky. But Frederick was starting to see that Honey wasn't the type of kid who'd abuse her abilities. I mean, if she wanted to, she would have already done it, right? And first one on the chopping block would have been Eleanor, then the maids for sure. But it was Honey who ended up covered in scars from getting beat on all the time. The emperor knew there was no way he could just forget about that. So, putting his faith in the girl, he just had to hope he was making the right call. Then, with a smile, he knelt down next to the princess and held out his hand. Even though the girl had been bracing herself for the worst, she was super happy the emperor believed her. Remembering she was supposed to say thanks in these situations, Honey thanked His Highness with all her heart. Frederick was super grateful to the kid for her insane bravery too, and then he ruffled her hair, which totally made her day. Turns out, the emperor found out she's already got full control over her powers. She knew it'd be best to show him, but they needed a spot where it didn't matter if stuff got wet. So Frederick suggested they head to the bathroom right next to the office. Honey was floored, never imagining he was so busy he needed a private bathroom in his office. Once they got there, the kid stepped back, getting ready to go. Taking a deep breath, she focused her magic in her hands, summoning ice crystals. Then she made the chunks rise up, while Frederick just chilled and watched. Right before his eyes, Honey started shaping the ice, from geometric figures to a bust of Oswald's head. Yeah, the emperor heard she was good with her powers, but this is way better than he thought. At the same time, he knew there were no secrets that stayed hidden forever in this world. So Frederick wanted to suggest using her abilities for good, and Honey actually had an idea about that. She figured she could make ice, then sell it, and use the money to help people in need. The emperor knew the main problem with selling ice was keeping it from melting. But if Honey used her magic right, the ice would barely take any damage. Deliveries would be easy, people's lives would get better, and even if they found out about her magic, nobody would judge her. When she got the go-ahead for her plan, she was totally stoked. But when he heard she was going to give him the money left over after helping people, Frederick was floored. He couldn't help but laugh, telling his little sister she didn't need to try and pay him. I mean, come on. She was still at that age where you just expect to get things. The emperor decided she could keep the rest of the cash, but hoped she'd donate some to charity. He figured the good deeds Honey did would one day become a power that protected her. With that, the little girl decided to take her leave, saying goodbye to His Highness. Suddenly, a shiny bracelet slipped out of the kid's dress, leaving Frederick totally stunned. Realizing he saw it and was picking it up, our girl started to freak out big time. The bracelet was pretty plain, and the emperor couldn't figure out why she was carrying it in her pocket and not wearing it. Then it hit him. That was her getaway money, in case she needed to bolt. Honey had to confess she was planning to run if things went south, and the bracelet was for that, to sell. The girl was too scared to look up at His Highness, who unexpectedly burst out laughing like a maniac. Frederique burst out laughing that out of all the jewels in her room, Honey picked that cheap little bracelet. Seeing the heroine blush like a tomato just made him crack up even more. Once he got his laughter under control, he said he understood and promised to stop teasing her. Now she was free to head back, especially since Oswald was probably freaking out looking for her. Giving a farewell bow, Honey thanked His Highness from the bottom of her heart for his kindness. Watching the little girl leave, Frederick suddenly thought of someone. Just like the emperor figured, this guy would be perfect for the job. Stepping outside, the heroine was super relieved that everything worked out so well. Suddenly, Scott called out to her, approaching the princess and bowing. Introducing himself, he gave his name and said he was a member of the Knight's Order. Hanny knew it was him instantly. That unforgettable smile still gave her the chills. Scott figured his behavior back then might have been kinda messed up. She looked worried, so he tried to help. But yeah, he went overboard. So right now, Scott was begging Her Highness to forgive his actions. Face down in the dirt, he was ready to take whatever punishment the princess thought he deserved. And he tried to calm him down, knowing the guy just did it because he was worried about her. But Scott wasn't buying it, couldn't accept the kindness, because that's how a master and knight should be. At least, that's what the captain always taught him. And speaking of the devil, Drake showed up right then. Telling Scott to shut his trap, the captain apologized to the heroine for his behavior. Henny jumped in to explain that the noble knight was just coming over because he was concerned. So Drake was stoked to introduce a knight who, despite being young, was already the second strongest in the order. Grinning, Hani and Scott promised they'd definitely watch each other's backs. The knight felt a little awkward with the captain hyping up his skills like that. He resolved to work even harder and become a kick-ass warrior for Her Majesty. Watching them, the girl dreamed that everyone would treat her with the same kindness. Frederick had a half-brother, Christopher, who point-blank refused the Archduke title, ending up as just a duke. You couldn't find anyone better to produce ice, seeing as he owned the Herne Mountains. Later on, the Emperor called the little girl over to introduce her to Christopher. Last time, Hani didn't touch the pastries, but this time she couldn't resist. And they were crazy delicious. The Duke was definitely the perfect fit for this business. But the problem was, would he even acknowledge Hani? Of all the royals, he hated Eleanor the most, which meant he hated her kid too. Suddenly, the door burst open, and there was Christopher, standing right there. But the Duke looking all messed up like that? It totally threw Hani for a loop. In Honey's memories, he was always this neat, dignified guy, with glasses and a stuffy tuxedo. Without his glasses, he didn't even see the little one, just walked right past her with this defeated groan. Plopping down on the couch next to his brother, Christopher was just glad to finally chill. Frederick thought it was gutsy, but his brother had been racing here non-stop for 4 days straight, on the Emperor's orders. The Duke was totally confused. He couldn't figure out what was so urgent. Turns out, there was some killer investment opportunity, and Frederick wanted his brother back in the business game. Seeing Christopher's stunned face, the Emperor clarified that he was talking about the ice business. The Duke was thrown, thinking some new ice storage tech must have dropped while he was gone. But even if Frederick guaranteed success, Christopher couldn't figure out what the rush was. That's when Honey lost it and explained the Emperor was talking about her powers. Hearing a voice he didn't recognize, the Duke tensed up, reaching for his glasses. Peering through the lens, he saw Honey sitting across from him, Eleanor's daughter. He blew a fuse, not understanding what powers they meant or why this chick was even here. Frederick introduced her as his brother's future partner, wanting her to show off her abilities. Since Honey's ice-making power was pretty dangerous, the Emperor wanted to give her a slightly different job. Hearing about some kind of power again, Christopher was completely lost. Frederick wanted his little sister to maintain the temperature and integrity of the ice for extended periods. With the order to move out, the princess started focusing magic in her hand. Then, right in front of the shocked Duke, she conjured up a bunch of ice spheres in midair. Scooping them up like they were on a plate, she immediately presented them to the Emperor. It was condensed cold air, which could help the manufacturing machine keep the ice frozen longer. Christopher was stunned by what he was seeing, realizing that this really was ice power. And he had to admit that with an ability like that, the ice business was destined for success. But the Duke didn't want anything to do with that woman's daughter, so the Emperor decided to drop some news on him. The girl didn't want Frederick pushing so hard if the Duke really wasn't interested. Still, the Emperor decided to give it a shot, knowing things were about to get interesting. First and foremost, he explained to his brother that the woman had been dead for a long time. After that, he gave Christopher the whole rundown about what happened, and about Honey. Christopher listened to the story, then slammed his fist on the table, sending cups and plates of pastries flying. Crying his eyes out, full of rage and frustration, he was like, how much longer is this crap gonna go on? The heroine had heard the Duke was a cold-blooded dude, wouldn't even bat an eye if someone died in front of him. But seeing him sobbing like that, the girl realized, yet again, you can't believe everything you hear. Even though he looked pretty stern, the Emperor said Frederick was full of empathy. Once he was done bawling, Christopher took the contract from his brother's outstretched hand. Looking at the cups and saucers scattered all over the floor, the heroine was just glad nothing broke. Only then did she realize why the Emperor had freaked out so much about the bracelet, which was probably cheaper than this dishware. After carefully checking out every clause, Christopher decided everything was cool with him. So Frederick asked him to clear out one of the palaces in a couple of days, which totally threw the Duke for a loop. Turns out, the Emperor was planning on giving it to Princess Honey, since she didn't have a palace of her own yet. The little girl figured it wasn't really necessary, since she could just keep living in her old palace. But Christopher insisted. Plus, he was supposed to drop in on the heroine regularly, according to the contract. That's when the kid gave in, which kind of flustered the Duke. With that settled, the Emperor was now looking to get rid of all her stuff in the old palace. Honey was cool with it, but she wanted to keep just one thing from everything in there. Getting the go-ahead, she bolted right away to grab it from the palace ASAP. As payback for his sass, Frederick sent his brother after the little one as her pack mule. Christopher agreed and headed outside, spotting the heroine near the fountain. The girl headed down the road towards the gates, and the Duke followed right behind. They didn't say a single word to each other the whole way, and the girl didn't even seem to notice he was there. When they got to the palace where she used to live with her mom, Honey stopped for a second. Christopher was checking out the area around the castle, a place he hadn't seen in like 10 years. Once inside, she made a beeline for the door to her old room. Inside, it was a total disaster, with broken furniture and junk scattered everywhere. Seeing the mess in the room, Christopher was wondering if they could even find anything in this dump. But then the girl started picking up a broken music box from the floor, which totally threw the Duke for a loop. He used to be furious that Frederick decided to give that thing to that woman's daughter. But the Emperor just wanted to get a gift for his sister, who was the same age as Oswald. And just like that, she carefully gathered up the shattered remains of the music box, looking at them with a sad expression. Unable to hold back anymore, Christopher burst into tears again, totally blowing his cover to Honey. She was completely caught off guard that the Duke had decided to show up here too. He admitted he came at his brother's request and was confused about this princess's precious little trinket. Seeing the music box was busted, he figured it was dangerous for a little kid to have. But the girl was dead set on keeping it, though what the Duke meant was he wanted her to give him the box. Surprised by that request, she slowly walked over to him and reluctantly handed it over. The trip back to the palace was just as quiet as before. Suddenly, Christopher stopped and turned to the young princess, leaving her totally puzzled. The Duke confessed that he'd honestly hated her this whole time, all because she was Eleanor's daughter. Considering what kind of woman she was, he couldn't imagine anything good. But then he realized what the girl had gone through. Christopher only trusted what he saw, and it ended up making him hate innocent people. The hero knew it was too late for this now, but he still decided to go for it. He bowed, apologizing for judging Honey all this time. He was genuinely sorry for all the pain he'd caused her with the way he acted. Of course, he didn't dare ask her to accept his apology right then and there, but Christopher intended to prove his sincerity through his actions and earn the right to be forgiven. Seeing his honesty, the main character decided not to stay silent either and tell him everything. She knew the reasons for his hatred and thought she still couldn't do anything about it, even though it hurt. It was so unfair, because no one gets to choose where they're born. Still, Honey was genuinely grateful that the hero was the first to apologize. She believed he was sincere, so she gladly accepted, which totally threw Christopher off. But the princess had no doubts, because he promised to prove everything with his actions himself. So the main character was hoping the Duke would just keep his word. Looking at her innocent smile, Christopher started slapping himself, thinking he was total garbage. Honey tried to stop him, because she had a cut on her hand from the broken jewelry box, and they needed to hurry. Agreeing, the Duke wrapped an arm around the girl's stomach, lifted her, and calmly started walking back. Getting flustered, the heroine was once again sure that you can't trust rumors. Meanwhile, back at Christopher's palace, the atmosphere was busy with everyday life. A short time later, the Duke walked through the front door, still holding the kid in his arms. One of the servants, a guy named Maverly, was totally surprised to see the master back from the Emperor so soon. The maids were stoked the boss was home too, and super curious about how the meeting with royalty went. Then, out of nowhere, they spotted a little girl Christopher was carrying like a sack of potatoes. The maids and Maverly were floored. He was lugging the princess around like she was some object. They knew the poor kid had to be uncomfortable, and probably too scared to say anything to the grumpy Duke. But Christopher figured it was no big deal, since he used to carry Oswald like that, and he never complained. Realizing Honey might actually be hurting, he apologized to the little girl for the rough treatment. The maids piled on, apologizing too, thinking the poor thing must have been miserable with the Duke's clumsiness. But the princess started defending the hero, saying he got her here super fast. One of the maids pulled a candy out of her pocket, beaming as she offered it to the little girl. This was a handcrafted candy from a famous sweet shop, and the taste was out of this world. Right then, the heroine felt a weird flutter inside, and she had no clue why. After the little girl gratefully took the treat, the maid introduced herself as Gerda. Suddenly, Gerda and the others freaked out when they saw a cut on Honey's hand. Catching their confused stares, the Duke explained that the heroine had cut herself on a broken box. The servants were seriously relieved that their worries about their master hadn't come true. Christopher ordered them to go and get the royal physician, like right now. While waiting for the doctor, the hero decided to take the young princess to the drawing room. Gerda and Mavrelio were told to follow them, while the other servants were free to get back to work. The staff wondered if the master had dismissed them a little too harshly maybe. With a wave of his hand, the Duke ordered them to bring snacks to the living room for him and the girl. Following Christopher, Honey turned back at one point, waving to the girls she was leaving behind. The maids were absolutely thrilled by how cute she was, and they weren't hiding it. They were surprised that despite looking just like Eleanor, the vibe around this kid was totally different. And since the master had brought her here himself, they wanted to do their best for the little one. A few minutes later, the royal physician arrived in the living room to see our heroes. Honey was expecting to see Agnes, but instead, a businesslike man with a briefcase walked in. His name was August, and his presence made the heroine uneasy. After the examination, he concluded that the princess just needed to bring her fever down a little. August was pissed. He couldn't understand why such a talented physician like him had to waste his time in this backwater. He used to treat the emperor himself, and now he's stuck with a broke-ass princess with no power or connections. He was running his mouth like that when his eyes landed on the Duke, who he recognized instantly. That's when the doc's whole attitude flipped, and he started sucking up to the hero, laying on the flattery thick. August figured it wasn't worth wasting time on some worthless kid right now. Better to check out the Duke first. He immediately spotted a small cut on Christopher's cheek and was itching to get to work on it. As for the little runt, well, in the doctor's opinion, her wounds could wait a bit. Stunned by what they just heard, the servants figured the number of court physicians had just dropped by 1. They just hoped the master wouldn't get too pissed, or he might scare Honey. Christopher gave the order, and 2 servants headed for August, who was completely frozen. Closing in fast, they had the freaked-out doctor pinned to the floor in a heartbeat. August couldn't wrap his head around why the Duke was suddenly treating him like this. Christopher was surprised that... he was surprised. Considering he always blew off the princess, the healer tried to defend himself, saying the hero himself used to think the kid was a pain in the ass. But even if the Duke did hate her, does that somehow erase the princess's royal status? And how dare the healer look down on a member of the royal family? But Christopher wasn't about to deny that. In the past, yeah, he hated Honey. And now, as August can clearly see, everything's totally flipped. That means the hero won't let some lowlife like him ignore and belittle the princess anymore. He planned to personally report this whole thing to the emperor, while August waited for his punishment. The servants dragged the guy into the hallway, and you could hear his screams for a while. Gerda was thinking, if she'd known this was an option, she would have just asked for some medicine. Honey was totally chill. She'd been dealing with stuff like this for ages. Christopher was horrified by what she said, and just stared at the kid, dumbfounded. He sat down across from her, determined not to hear her say anything like that again. The Duke's always going to be there to help her, so he hoped that if anything happened, Honey would come straight to him. As he started healing her wounds, the hero suddenly noticed how skinny the little girl was. Turns out, she was actually fatter than she used to be, which completely threw Christopher for a loop. When he was done patching her up, Mavrlaya got curious, wondering where the master got that scar on his cheek. To the servant's surprise, the Duke inflicted the injury himself, slapping his own face. He did it as punishment for being so damn rude to Honey. That's when Mavrly and Gerda remembered all the messed up stuff the old master had gotten away with before. They were actually stoked he'd finally grown up, and was starting to think straight. Christopher sighed, wondering how their attitudes would change if their master suddenly switched up. Hearing about a new master, Mavrly froze up, his jaw practically hitting the floor. The hero was stoked to introduce their new mistress, pointing to Honey, which the emperor had already confirmed. He hoped the servants would take care of her with the same love and care they'd given him. Gerda and Mavrly started jumping for joy, because things were about to get way more fun in the palace. When the heroine's moving day finally rolled around, the servants in her old room were scrambling to pack and clean up. According to Viola, August got busted for corruption and was shipped off to some prison on the edge of nowhere. She also dolled up the princess, dressing the little one in a super fancy, sparkly dress. While Hani was stressing about greeting the new servants today, Oswald stood nearby, looking all pouty. He figured the girl didn't have to go to another palace and ditch him here all alone. Hani appreciated what he said, but there was nothing she could do now, and her bags were practically packed anyway. That's when the kid made her promise that they'd visit each other every single day. It was time to leave, and Christopher came in to get the little one. Hani nodded, and Oswald piped up, saying he really wanted to go with them. But the Duke knew the boy had lessons today. He just smiled silently. The guy didn't have the strength to argue, especially because if he forbade it, Hani would start comforting Oswald. As they approached the heroine's new palace, Christopher's face went completely slack with surprise. Grinning and facepalming, he figured someone obviously couldn't hold back. They walked a bit further, and he covered the little girl's eyes with his hand when she suddenly smelled something sweet. Reaching the entrance, the Duke wanted Honey to really pay attention to what she was about to see. He removed his hand, revealing a crowd of servants who had thrown a party to celebrate her arrival. The heroine was blown away by the colorful decorations and the endless compliments being thrown her way. As they passed through the corridor of staff, joyful greetings rang out from everywhere. Seeing the shock on Honey's face, Gerda figured the young lady wasn't ready for this level of crazy. Even the perpetually uptight Duke felt pretty awkward hearing that. Just then, the chef appeared from the palace, pushing a cart with a 3-tiered cake he'd made himself. Oswald was deeply impressed by the elegance and beauty of the confectionery masterpiece. Unlike him, Honey stared at the gigantic cake with eyes full of terror and shock. The heroine never experienced anything like this before, and she thought she didn't even need it. But right now, her heart was pounding in a way she'd never felt before. Smiling, Oswald figured Honey was the star of the show today, so she should just soak it all in. As she reached out to take his hand, the girl realized she really wasn't alone anymore. She thought not just the cake was amazing, but everything they'd planned for her today. Crying tears of joy, Honey felt like it was her actual birthday. Those words got Mavrelia choked up too, and Gerda thought it was the best day for them as well. Hearing the suggestion to blow out the candles, the little one was at a loss, because she'd never done that before. In that moment, Christopher realized that no one had ever thrown a party for her, ever. So, the Duke decided to go all out to prepare a banquet for her birthday celebration. First off, the heroine shared the chef's signature cake with everyone there. Taking in the vibe of the place and tasting the cake, Oswald decided he was ready to trust them with Honey. Christopher froze, thinking it was weird to hear words like that from a nephew about his aunt. The hero hoped nothing was bothering the princess, and she was just enjoying the day. The girl nodded, deciding that she really liked everything and was just grateful. Honey didn't even know why, but she really liked the people here. Since Christopher had met them at her age, he could vouch that they were trustworthy. Pausing for a moment, the Duke decided he couldn't leave that music box broken. Hearing he was going to fix it, the heroine was super surprised, thinking it was impossible. But according to the Duke, they employed the most skilled artisans in the Empire, who could handle the job. Honey stared at the hero, knowing she could always listen to that amazing music box melody again later. Oswald decided to stay the night, and later they both got into bed on opposite sides. Lying in bed, the girl remembered getting that music box as a gift 2 years ago. The reason she even made it this far was because Honey had kept it hidden from her mom. But that one time, the girl forgot to hide it, and that's when the tragedy happened. Somehow, she managed to start all over, so it seemed like there was no reason to stay on guard anymore. But looking at Oswald sleeping now, Honey decided she wasn't dropping her guard ever again. Scooting closer to him and taking his hand, she resolved to protect herself and her family. Unlike her last family, these people had taught her a whole new way to show love. And Oswald was the first one to make Honey feel that. She was determined to protect him to the very end. And the little one actually fell asleep holding the boy's hand. The next morning, gentle, girly hands softly touched Honey, trying to wake her up. Opening her eyes, the little girl saw Viola's happy face in front of her, smiling down at her. Honey was surprised, but it turned out the maid couldn't leave without saying good morning to her mistress. The reason Viola wasn't there yesterday was because she was being transferred, which surprised the princess. The little one didn't get it. Was an emperor's maid, who's basically second in command, really going to work here? Viola decided to reintroduce herself, declaring that from that day on, she would be the princess's personal maid. At yesterday's celebration, the heroine searched for the girl, not wanting to leave without saying goodbye. Of course, Honey thought it would be awesome to keep hanging out with her. Still, it seemed weird to her that His Majesty's maid would have anything to do with a regular princess. Viola shot back, because she thought this spot was perfect for getting work done. Digging the cuteness of the kid's confused face, she spotted a sleepy Oswald behind her. The sweetness level was off the charts. She almost couldn't hold back the hug attack. Instead, she flashed back to months ago, when she was the first to see Honey's injuries. Viola's heart ached when she learned the girl had silently endured it all, without a peep. It started to worry her, seeing how the kid was all curled up and watching everything. Then, after a few days, Honey shyly smiled and thanked her for the very first time. That's when Viola truly realized just how kind-hearted the princess really was. Right then and there, the maid wanted to know her lady even better, deciding to join her, barely holding back tears. The princess wanted Viola to always be by her side now. Oswald finally woke up, heard the chatter, and pounced on them with a big hug. The maid remembered why she'd woken the kid up. Empress Melissa was about to arrive. Her visit was all about getting clothes made specially for Honey, and she was bringing a tailor. The girl was thrown for a loop, giving Viola a confused look. Turns out, besides Melissa and the tailor, Drake, Christopher, and Prince Frederick showed up too. The Duke just caught wind of something happening and figured he'd tag along. The Emperor didn't have anything crucial today, and the captain was just escorting him. The Empress always wanted to do this together if she ever had a daughter, but didn't think it'd go down like this. The girl was sure she got enough stuff last time, but Melissa wasn't buying it. Besides, the Empress wanted to get the princess a proper housewarming gift. Judging by the sheer number of outfits, Honey figured they'd brought an entire store here. Frederick was surprised his wife wanted to try all these clothes on the little one, but she didn't see it as a big deal. Once they started the fashion show, the princess modeled each outfit for the three guys, who couldn't decide which looked best. One of the dresses was made from a special kind of silk, way softer than all the others. Since a kid's gonna be wearing it, the Empress made sure it was super comfy. By the time the try-on session was over, our girl was totally wiped out, having gone through dozens of outfits. To her surprise, Melissa was planning on buying her everything they'd picked out. Realizing it was time to pay, Frederick, Christopher, and Drake all whipped out their checks at the same time. But it turned out the Empress had already paid for everything, leaving the guys speechless. She'd ordered them to sign checks every single time Honey put on a new dress. Holding the girl, the Empress wondered if the princess had a tough day. Honey couldn't figure out why she was so tired, since she'd just been sitting around all day. Oswald promised to come by right after his lessons, but for now, they carried her to her room, and she crashed out instantly. Word spread like wildfire from the heroine's old palace about how amazing life was at her new place. No matter how much of a she-devil Eleanor was, her daughter turned out to be the sweetest princess ever. Some people felt bad for Honey now, because she was a kid, but wondered what would happen when she got older. The maids at the girls' palace were stoked that Christopher was showing his face around more since she'd arrived. Just then, while strolling around the palace grounds, our girl spotted the Duke. She immediately ran to greet him, but he told her it wasn't safe to run like that. Turns out, she knew he was coming beforehand, so she came here to meet him ASAP. Christopher gave her dress the once-over, then suddenly started taking off his cloak. He wrapped it around her, figuring it was chilly out, and she could easily catch a cold in what she was wearing. She tried to argue, saying she couldn't get cold because of her powers, but the Duke wasn't having any of it. After that, cool as you like, he scooped her up in his arms and headed back to the palace. When they got to Frederick, he and the Emperor started arguing about the kid's hairstyle. The Duke was floored by how bad his brother was at picking the right shape. The main reason for their meeting was to get ready to launch the ice business. The project's gonna be run under the Hearn Peak name, so they needed to lock down the market in every region. There's no way to hide the tech issues Honey solved with her ability. The Emperor freaked out when he heard they'd have to release a statement. The Duke was about to announce they'd cracked the storage problem, but it was top secret. Right then, he finished doing the girl's hair, fixing it up real nice. After that, he handed Frederick all the documents, equipment, logistics, the whole budget breakdown. Looking at them, Honey got the feeling the heroes weren't scared or disgusted by her power. They were surprised, like, did she even want them to be afraid of her? Hearing that, the heroine shook her head immediately, because that wasn't it at all. The heroes were totally chill and saw absolutely no reason to be scared. But Frederick admitted there was a moment he got spooked, just because the girl had magic powers. And while they were being honest, he also confessed that Oswald had powers too. Hearing that, Honey froze for a few seconds, processing the info she just got. Snapping out of it, she stared at the Emperor, totally stunned, and blurted out, "What the?" Frederick walked over and patted her on the head, trying to calm her down a little. At first, the Emperor thought it was just a coincidence how insightful the kid was. But over time, it became clear that the Crown Prince had some kind of precognitive ability. It was the power of the God of Light, which just confused the hell out of our girl all over again. From her past life, she already knew that this was the main god of the entire empire. He symbolized light and the sun, and also had the ability of prophecy and foresight. Even though Oswald's power isn't always active, and he can't control it, it's already been a huge help. The heroine also knew that the Crown Prince wasn't the only one with this ability, but it wasn't time yet. Now she realized it wasn't an illusion at all, and the kid really could see right through her. Who knows? Maybe it wasn't just by chance he was in that hallway that day and saw the maids dragging her. The jerk that Honey hated more than anyone was showering someone else with his love. But if it really was Oswald, then the kid they called Light was actually loved by Light himself. The heroine wondered how many other people knew about the Crown Prince's powers. Turns out, pretty much the whole imperial family was in on it, plus like 5 other people, including the High Priest. Then the girl wanted to know, could she tell the boy about her power now? Frederick knew that could be tricky, and it was better to hold off for now. Because like he said before, it's safer if as few people as possible know about the princess's power. Understanding how worried he was, Honey apologized, figuring she'd said something dumb. Later, leaving the palace with the heroine, Christopher noticed how down she looked. So, like, totally casually, he brings up how the princess is gonna have to start classes soon. The kid's all surprised. But the Duke knew, now that she's used to the palace, she's ready to hit the books. Right then, she realized how damn perceptive the Duke was, because studying was Honey's biggest dream. But thing is, the little one's way too cautious, and Christopher only just picked up on it. If all she does is sit around being jealous, nothing's ever gonna change for her. And when he said he'd help her out before, he wasn't just blowing smoke. Then the kid gave him this real smile and thanked Christopher for figuring out what she wanted. After walking Honey back to the palace, the Duke went back to the Emperor, cutting him off from work. The Duke looked genuinely terrified and shocked, which actually threw Frederick for a loop. The Emperor figured his brother forgot something, but turns out it was about the princess. The Duke's thinking we gotta get her a tutor ASAP. He told the Emperor about their little chat, how he was trying to cheer her up, but Fred thought it was too soon for her to start studying, even though he'd been hitting the books since he was a kid. Thing is, when he found out she was the one who wanted to learn, Fred flipped his position like a pancake. First off, he needed to know if there was anyone even available for the job. Christopher threw out 2 names, and the Emperor went with Sir Harvard. Seemed more loyal. Once that was settled, Fred himself fired off a letter asking the guy to come on over. Meanwhile, the ice biz was booming day by day, and word was starting to get around. So one day, Christopher overhears Oswald wondering if Honey's, hitting puberty yet? The girl was totally caught off guard, and the Duke practically choked, trying not to laugh. Honey swung around, hoping he'd help, but the Duke was practically busting a gut trying not to laugh. Turns out, the kid had seen those words in a book recently and decided to figure out what they meant. The book said teenagers try to bathe themselves, and that's what the little one was doing, practicing her magic. So, putting on this overly thoughtful face, Christopher guessed that, yeah, maybe it was puberty. Seeing the look on the girl's face, he started praying she'd get the joke. Then, our hero decided to explain to the Crown Prince that the princess just needed time to adjust to her new surroundings. That's why she was acting that way, and the kid just nodded like, got it. Oswald wasn't the kind of guy you could fool with words like that, but it looked like Christopher pulled it off. Looking ahead, the Duke realized with horror that it looked like everyone had already arrived. The kids started hurrying everyone along, realizing they were already late. They were heading to a family dinner, the first one ever for Princess Honey. Walking into the dining room, the Duke apologized for being a little late. He also gave a special apology to Empress Mother Constance. In response, she smiled and offered Princess Honey a seat next to her. Accepting, the little one realized this was the first time she'd seen Her Majesty since arriving at the palace. Melissa was totally thrown off by Oswald's hairstyle, the one Christopher gave him. Now that everyone was here, it was time to start. And soon the table was overflowing with culinary masterpieces. Just looking at the dishes made the heroine dizzy, and a ravenous appetite woke up inside her. Constance suggested Honey start with the salmon, saying it was incredibly delicate. Putting a piece of the fish on her tongue, the princess's eyes sparkled with pure delight. The Empress was stoked that the little one was digging the dish's unique flavor. Next thing you know, she's shoveling more food her way, while the Duke's just watching them like a hawk. He's totally thrown off like, when did his mom get so damn caring? When he and his brother were kids, they couldn't even dream of this. Mom just figured they could handle everything themselves. Constance couldn't believe a grown-ass man could be jealous of his baby sister. Frederick grinned, realizing his brother was just craving Mom's attention and didn't want to share it. So, the Emperor decides to take care of his bro himself and sneaks a piece of salmon onto his plate. Then, he starts patting Christopher on the head, telling him to chew it a whole bunch. Frederick was fighting tooth and nail to keep a straight face, but he was cracking up inside. The funniest part was Christopher's face. He was totally shell-shocked by the whole thing. The Emperor and everyone else lost it, cracking up at the hero's totally confused face. After polishing off the fish, he figured Frederick could have some fun, just not go overboard. A few minutes later, Constance remembered the princess was currently on the hunt for a teacher. The Empress felt a little bad. The kid was so eager to jump into studying. Still, she had faith the main character could handle anything thrown her way. Constance believed Honey held so much potential in those little hands. She could be anything she wanted. That's why she wanted the girl to ignore everyone else, follow her heart, and take her time. Everything in its own season. Even after the family dinner ended, the girl remembered those words, smiling as she looked at her palms. Honestly, she really enjoyed the gathering today and was bummed it was already over. On moving day and now, the heroine really loved the vibe when everyone got together and hung out. The Duke figured there was no point in dwelling on it, because there'd be plenty more nights like this coming up. Besides, once the princess sees what's waiting for her in the palace, she'll be stoked that things ended early. This was something she'd been looking forward to, and after a quick thought, Honey stared at our hero, totally blown away. She thought fixing the music box would take forever, but thanks to his natural charm and fat wallet, the Duke worked his magic. They rushed back to the palace, where Christopher handed the heroine a small chest. Opening it up, she saw the music box, completely restored. Pleasant memories started flashing before the little girl's eyes, making them sparkle. For a few minutes, Honey was mesmerized by the gift, which she never even hoped to see fixed again. Picking it up with her hands, the heroine carefully examined the box from all angles. The broken pieces and glass had been replaced, and now it looked brand new. With the music on, the girl lay down next to it, a gentle smile spreading across her face, truly enjoying life. A little later, as she was leaving class, she unexpectedly bumped into Christopher. He greeted her back, and found out the teacher was so energetic that she had to work extra hard too. Usually, Harvard isn't that active, but it looks like seeing our girl here has given him some motivation. Turns out, the Duke actually left the house today for the first time in 3 days. To Honey's surprise, the reason the Duke was so busy was Oswald. The kid wanted to take the princess for a walk around town, so Christopher was trying to keep himself occupied. But now, he was wondering if the little one would even agree to go on a walk. The girl's eyes lit up and she happily agreed, realizing she'd be leaving the palace gates for the first time. The outing was planned for tomorrow, since the Duke needed a little time to recover. All right, time to focus on the job. Honey had to whip up like 20 chunks of condensed air. After all that training, she was creating those icy particles in the air with way more ease and style. She scooped them up in a pouch and handed it over to the Duke. No problem. Christopher thanked her, pointing out that Honey was getting seriously skilled at this. Maybe it was all that talk about puberty that did it, because the kid just raised her eyebrows with a smirk. Either way, she nailed it, like always. The next day, dressed in plain clothes like commoners, the trio was getting ready to hit the road. Oswald was freaking out about how Honey still looked totally adorable, even in those rags. This outfit made her feel like she was actually going outside, and her heart was pounding in her chest. She glanced at the Duke and was surprised to see this massive sword hanging from his belt. Turns out the dude wasn't exactly a master with it, but he brought it along just in case. Either way, relying on Christopher for that kind of thing wasn't the best idea, since he only knew the basics. Dad once told Oswald that his uncle was way better at martial arts than fencing. Looking at the Duke, Honey realized you don't get a build like that without some serious training. Plus, the last emperor stole the throne, which pissed off a ton of rich guys and turned them into political enemies. So yeah, the childhoods of his 2 oldest sons definitely weren't a walk in the park. After a while, the group finally made it to the capital city's main shopping street. The heroine was blown away by everything around them, from the merchandise to the crowds. First things first, Christopher laid down the rules for the kids. No wandering off alone, and no following strangers. He made them repeat everything until they could recite it in their sleep. A few minutes later, the kids were finally free and let out a sigh of relief. They started moving down the street, their eyes darting all over the place. First off, Honey was blown away by all the different kinds of fruit at the street stalls. She was also impressed by the variety of fish and how they were using the ice she made. Compared to the palace, the vibe was totally different, which the girl loved. Seeing a corn dog vendor off to the side, Oswald wondered what the heck that was. Having no clue himself, Christopher suggested the kids try them out with the money he'd given them. The vendor was happy to see such cute customers and told them the price. They pulled out their little pouches and did some quick math, counting out the right amount. Just for the little ones, the lady picked out the biggest, most delicious corn dogs with extra sauce. The kids were totally hypnotized by this mystery snack, with its killer, meaty smell. Turns out, this thing tasted freaking amazing, like a party in every cell of your body. After trying a few more street foods, the kids were shocked to find their cash had vanished. As they kept strolling down the market street, one of the shops caught Honey's eye. It was jewelry, and there was one thing in particular that really stood out. They were 3 bracelets, and they had this deep name: "Give your unchanging heart to the one you treasure." Knowing the kids were officially broke, Christopher offered to cover the cost himself. Oswald and Honey each put on a bracelet, looking pretty stoked with their new bling. They gave the 3rd bracelet to the Duke, who thought it was actually kind of touching. Walking on, the girl looked up and suddenly froze dead in her tracks. In the distance, towering over the houses and forest, was the gigantic, snow-capped Mount McLeod. It was the tallest mountain in the whole empire, visible from absolutely everywhere. The unbelievably intense cold, now centered in the heart of the country, had been filling the empire's people with dread for 500 years. Turning her head, Honey saw a kind-looking fruit vendor smiling at a young customer. The heroine knew that if everyone found out about her abilities, no one would ever smile at her again. Meanwhile, the heroes slowly made their way to the top of Herne, where the district's administrative building was located. A young guy, totally focused on his work at the desk, was surprised someone had just walked in. Seeing it was the Duke, the guy freaked out. His whole body started shaking. He had no clue what brought His Highness here, while Christopher was just surprised by his reaction. The reason was that during his last visit, the Duke had dumped a mountain of work on him. The guy chilled out when he heard all he was doing today was hanging out, and decided to introduce himself to the kids. The Duke introduced him to the Crown Prince and Princess, which totally blew the young dude's mind. Turns out the guy's name was Bob, and he ran the district from the top of Herne. Since His Highness was already here, Bob wanted to give Christopher a few documents to look over. The Duke was hoping the kids would just chill in the room and wait for him while he stepped out for a second. He honestly believed that while they were in here, nothing could possibly go wrong, and it was all good. Until Honey, staring out the window lost in thought, suddenly saw something horrible. She shot up from her chair, and her face totally freaked Oswald out, leaving him confused. She ran outside, hoping the boy would get Christopher as soon as possible. Despite Oswald's protests, she couldn't ignore some grown-up being a total jerk to a kid. She bolted outside, desperately scanning for the knights who were with them. Rounding the corner, she finally spotted Scott and the others, who were totally surprised to see her. The knights were baffled why the young princess was out on the city streets all alone. It was way too dangerous, and Scott needed to know what the hell was going on. Grabbing the young knight's hands, she begged him to come with her and help this poor girl. Scott looked at the other warriors, confused, but they just silently nodded. Scooping the princess into his arms, he and the others quickly headed in the direction she pointed. Suddenly, Honey saw a horrifying scene ahead, one that made her defy the Duke's orders. Enraged that the little girl denied having any money, the grown man just tossed her aside. Not believing a word she said, he grabbed a glass bottle, ready to force the money out of her. Thing is, according to the girl, the guy already took everything 2 days ago. Through her tears, she begged him to be reasonable, saying there's no way she could get more money that fast. Deciding to check the story, the dude started waving a bottle around, threatening the girl. But suddenly, a knight grabbed his arm, figuring that method was a bit too dangerous. At the same time, Scott turned Honey away so she wouldn't see what was happening. He also asked the victim to look away, promising he'd sort everything out. The guy started going nuts, insulting the knights and trying to break free. Then, one of them made a quick move, and with a precise strike, knocked the bottle right out of the jerk's hand. Seeing that it was a girl who did it, the enraged dude went after her with his fists, luckily blocking his punch. The knight left the guy completely stunned. She flipped him over, and with one hell of a kick, slammed that scumbag into the wall of the house. Clutching where she hit him, the guy was shaking from the pain and the sheer terror surging through him. That's when another knight walked up to him and pointed his sword at the villain's head, hoping that would finally shut him up. Suddenly, the guy spotted the very bottle that had been knocked out of his hand lying right next to him. Driven mad by fear and rage, he told the soldiers to mind their own damn business and hurled the bottle forward. Scott managed to snatch it out of the air a split second before it smacked Honey in the head. Grinning with a sinister smirk, the knight figured the guy had crossed the line big time. Right after that, the princess started hearing the guy's pained moans behind her, so she covered her ears. Pulling out some rope, the knights decided to do things right and tied him up good. Beaten to a pulp, the guy kept hurling insults at the heroes, even tied up as he was. That's when Scott snapped and knocked him out with a neck chop, leaving everyone speechless. Honey glanced at the girl who'd been hurt, and she could see distrust and contempt in her eyes. The princess decided to check if the little girl she'd saved was okay. The girl figured out that it was the princess who'd asked the soldiers for help. But did this naive do-gooder really think the girl would be grateful for that? She couldn't give a damn about that kind of help, and she gave her saviors a look of disgust. Watching some rich lady help someone is already annoying, but it's even worse when it's done out of greedy pity. Afraid that she and her mom would face the consequences later, the girl told the princess to take her pity back. Honey tried to explain that she was acting out of genuine sympathy, but the girl wouldn't hear it. She was furious that someone who dragged around 3 guards and demanded to be called Milady would dare show pity. Seeing the knights tense up, the heroine signaled them to stand down. The kid was right. Honey really didn't know squat about this world, but she knew damn well how much it sucked to get beat, which is why she rushed in. She got curious, wondering if the girl knew Princess Honey, Eleanor's daughter, and that freaked her right out. Seeing that reaction, the heroine showed her a hand riddled with scars from constant beatings. Honey used to feel pain so bad she wanted to die, but thanks to help from others, she could finally live happily. That included the 3 knights who were with her now, guarding her ass. That's why the princess wanted to help, seeing an adult hurting a kid like that. It wasn't just some random act of kindness from a clueless noble. The heroine wanted to share what she'd gotten herself. So, Honey invited the girl to come with her to the Imperial Palace, if her parents let her. Just then, Christopher shows up behind our girl, totally pissed and carrying Oswald under his arm. Honey was stoked to see them, but the kid freaked out at the sight of even more nobles. Both heroes started firing off questions, wanting to know what went down and if the princess was hurt. The Duke was in shock that she'd run off like that, and the little girl just gave him a guilty smile. One of the knights volunteered to fill him in on everything that happened, but looking at the little girl and the tied-up guy, the hero was already starting to put 2 and 2 together. After hearing the knight's story, the Duke found out the victim's name was Judy. She confessed that the guy who attacked her was actually her own father. They never had to work, since their family owned a shop they inherited from her grandpa. Then, her dad got hooked on gambling, and when the money ran out, he pawned everything, the house, the shop, and lost it all. So Dad started hitting the bottle, forcing Mom and me to work our tails off, just so he could gamble it all away again. Mom's friends and the neighbors tried to help her divorce his sorry ass, but that just pissed him off even more. Judy knew she was unforgivable for disrespecting her royal highness like that, but the heroine totally got where she was coming from and hoped the kid would let her help out. Christopher backed up the princess, figuring they'd already started helping, so they might as well see it through. That's when Judy decided to ask for help divorcing her mom. But that was a total non-starter. An opportunity like this doesn't come around often, so the Duke wanted the girl to be outrageously greedy. Besides, right now, Christopher and Honey had the power to completely take care of all her problems. Judy went into a daze, still processing everything she'd heard and barely believing it was real. Later, the heroes walked along, talking about the main character getting into that super prestigious National Academy. Honey could finally focus on her studies while Christopher helped Judy out. Right then, Oswald and the princess started taking turns showering the hero with praise, calling him cool, smart, and loaded. The Duke chimed in, saying he also had power, which got everyone laughing. He just hoped Honey wasn't trying to crack jokes, so he'd forget about that escape attempt. That day, the princess had to head back to the palace and memorize 101 safety rules for kids. Judy's dad was thrown in jail, and she and her mom got things settled so she could apply to the academy. The sudden changes in the family's life caught the attention of the villagers, who never found out who exactly had helped them. Aside from her lessons with the teacher, the heroine was also taking etiquette classes, led by Madame Melissa. After all that hardcore studying, Honey's blood sugar dropped, and she went to town on the sweets. Sitting at the table with the Empress, the girl suddenly saw Melissa start coughing really badly. Out of nowhere, the Empress jumps up from her chair, coughing like crazy and groaning in pain. Honey's frozen, totally clueless about what's going on, scrambling to figure out a plan. Then it hits her. The Empress has been pregnant this whole time. In her past life, Eleanor poisoned Melissa, killing her and the unborn kid inside her. Time passes, the pregnancy's confirmed, and Frederick and Constance show up to congratulate the Empress. The kids are there too, and Oswald's stoked to find out he's getting a little brother or sister. It's been 8 years since the last grandkid, so Constance suggests throwing a huge celebration. Melissa thinks it'd be awesome if the whole country could share in the excitement. But first, they gotta hit up the Temple of the Light God and pray for the kids' well-being. Honey jumps in with her congratulations, earning a sincere thank you in return. The Empress was practically bursting with anticipation to see how beautiful this kid would be. Eleanor's gone. Nobody's gonna poison the lady anymore. But the heroine still felt a knot in her stomach. A couple days later, the Emperor, his wife, and the kids finally set off for the Temple of the Light God. High Priest Kelvin came out to greet them, surrounded by monks from the temple. They bowed low, welcoming the honored guests and servants of the Light God. Wishing them strength of the winds, Kelvin suddenly locked eyes with the heroine. Honey was super confused by this, and the High Priest started chatting with the Emperor. Kelvin was glad to hear that His Highness and the others had arrived safely. They were just exchanging pleasantries, but it looked like Frederick and the High Priest were friends and felt at ease around each other. After the chat, they all headed to the main prayer hall, where a stone statue of the Light God stood. First, everyone bowed. Then they cleansed their lips and hands with holy water. After that, it was time for everyone to get down on their knees and pray. For a while, the heroine watched everyone praying, eyes closed, opening their hearts to God. Then, she shifted her gaze to the statue of the God of Light, thinking back to the past. Before she died, she prayed a lot, and now she was doing it again. Honey was pretty sure her prayer wouldn't be answered, but hoped that just once, God wouldn't turn away from her. The girl sincerely wished that Melissa and Frederick's child would be born safe and sound. After the ceremony, the Emperor wanted to step away for a bit and talk with Kelvin. Agreeing, the Holy Father suggested the kids take a little walk around the church grounds for now. Listening to him talk about the beautiful flowers here, she got this weird feeling, like something was off. Unlike her, Oswald stared at Kelvin with wide eyes, like he was totally mesmerized. The girl didn't get why they needed to go anywhere, but the Crown Prince suddenly insisted they take a walk. As Hani left, she couldn't shake the feeling that the Holy Father was giving her a weird once-over. Suddenly, a horrifying thought struck her. What if Kelvin found out about her abilities? Scott and his partner went with the kids, and the knight spent the whole trip gushing over the spring scenery. Scott decided he'd like a little bro like Oswald, and his partner would be stoked to have a fencing sister. Suddenly, the most unbelievably gorgeous garden appeared before them, bursting with fragrant flowers and springtime colors. The kids were frozen in shock, and the escorts just stood there with their jaws dropped. Putting on a thoughtful face, Oswald remembered that it had to be around here somewhere. Not knowing what he was looking for, our girl suddenly felt a shadow fall over her. Something just zipped right over their heads like lightning, totally throwing everyone for a loop. The knights instantly rushed to protect the princess and the crown prince from the surprise attack. Scooping up Honey, Scott made a sharp move, leaping way off to the side. Then he hit the ground, shielding the little girl in front of him, holding her tight. Whatever that was. The hero was just glad the attempt to hurt the kids had failed. His partner wanted them to stay put while she dealt with the hostile. But then, to her surprise, the kid acted like the whole thing was no big deal. Looking at where the uninvited guest had landed, the knight froze in disbelief. Up ahead, standing between them and Scott with Honey, was a massive tiger with a 4-pointed star on its forehead. The princess eyed the furry giant warily, not knowing who he was or where he came from. That was the sacred guardian of this place, blessed by the god of light himself, named Light. Hearing that from Oswald, the heroine was totally confused. Why was this holy tiger suddenly in front of her? Seeing Light start to approach the princess, Scott jumped between them, sword drawn. Honey figured that because of her power, the tiger saw her as an enemy that needed to be taken out. Oswald quickly reassured the heroes, saying that Light wasn't planning on attacking at all. On the contrary, the tiger was super happy they were here, but bummed that they were blocking his way. Walking up to the boy, Light offered him his paw as a greeting, which totally surprised him. But suddenly, Oswald wagged his finger, giving the tiger a scolding. After all, Light almost hurt Honey, so he needed to seriously think about his actions. The tiger's ears immediately drooped, his eyes closed, and a single tear rolled down his cheek. The kid rushed over to the girl, making sure she wasn't actually hurt. Honey figured she was okay thanks to Scott, but the dude was all like, he just did what he had to. Besides, compared to what Commander Drake usually pulls, this was nothing. But Honey kept piling on the praise, and Oswald jumped on the bandwagon. For the young knight, this kind of praise was the best thing about the job, even if it made him blush. Out of nowhere, the tiger snuck up behind the princess and gave her a nudge with his head, totally spooking her. His eyes were super gentle, though according to Oswald, Light was being extra disobedient today. Getting closer to Honey, the kid figured she probably felt something weird too when Kelvin sent them here. That's when she realized he knew everything and was just going with his gut. Honey stared at Oswald and Light, who both got blessings from the god of light. She thought the two of them were incredibly cute, which honestly just confused the knights. I mean, how could a 4-meter tiger with a tail thicker than your wrist seem cute? Light walked up to the girl and put his snout in her hands, then started purring. Sure, she'd seen wild beasts on the snowy mountain, but this one felt warm, like sunshine. The two kids started scratching the happy predator, whose eyes just glazed over with bliss. The obedient kitty gave them his paw, which totally thrilled the heroes. Scott had heard this thing wasn't exactly friendly, so he was genuinely surprised right now. But Honey just thought he was a big stray cat who needed some love and attention. Suddenly, they heard Captain Drake let out a confused yell from over yonder. The Emperor, escorted by the captain and some church officials, was headed their way. "What the hell is going on here?" Drake demanded. The second he saw the tiger, Kelvin smacked himself in the forehead, realizing it had been way too long since Light had been around. Frederick and the others noticed how tiny the princess looked next to that kitty. "Hey!" Honey snapped, totally offended at being called tiny. The Emperor himself had to apologize. The Holy Father promised they'd be more careful from now on and would try to prevent this from happening again. If the day ever came when the little one needed his help, Kelvin was ready to make amends. The main character filed that away, thinking it might come in handy if her powers ever awakened. Suddenly, the tiger walked right up to her and licked her hand, playfully closing its eyes. Honey took that as an apology, while the servants, including Kelvin, were completely blown away, because they knew this beast as a total diva who wouldn't even let anyone touch him. The second Frederick gave the order to leave, Light's eyes changed completely. He was almost in tears saying goodbye to the girl, but there was nothing he could do, so Honey tied one of her ribbons to his paw, hoping the tiger would keep it until they met again. Along with all the servants, Light came out to see the heroes off, waving his ribboned paw in farewell. The next morning, the princess was sleeping peacefully in her bed, having beautiful dreams. Suddenly, through her sleep, the girl felt her hand brush against something that felt like fur, hugging something that felt like a soft, warm cloud. She started snoring softly, but then a thought flashed through her head, and she instantly woke up, jumping up and throwing off the blanket. She screamed in surprise at the sight of a little tiger, but in that instant, she recognized Light in the guest's features. Overjoyed by his arrival, the heroine was blown away that the tiger could shrink down like that, turning into a regular ginger cat. After saying that, Light made a smooth move and hopped off the bed, all graceful. As soon as he hit the floor, boom! He was a massive tiger again, grinning at Honey. The princess realized he got punished yesterday because he went after her in that form. Honey was thankful Light showed up, but if anyone else saw him, all hell would break loose. Just then, a cheerful Gerda walked into the room, ready to wake the princess. Seeing a huge tiger next to her bed, she froze, letting out a terrified scream. Getting a grip, she begged her highness not to make a sound. Dropping to the floor, the maid crawled to her mistress's bed like some kind of commando, eyeing the beast warily. Snatching the girl, she bolted from the room, screaming for help at the top of her lungs. Her screaming caused total chaos in the palace. Everyone was freaking out. Later, alone with Honey and Light, Frederick heard the story of his sudden appearance. Calmly holding the kitty, the princess was sure he'd come here to see her. What amazed the emperor most was that the tiger even brought his stuff, neatly packed in a basket, which meant that, apparently, Light wasn't planning on going back. Realizing where this was going, the little tiger jumped out of the heroine's arms, running to the basket. Rummaging through his things, Light pulled out a big emerald and happily held it out to the emperor. Frederick figured they probably hadn't noticed he was gone from the temple yet, but Light absolutely had to return. So the emperor decided to talk to the cat alone, asking Honey to step outside for a bit. The hero waited for the girl to leave the office before he started talking. Turning to the cat, the emperor confessed that even he couldn't control the fate of a divine being's property. And even if he could, the fact that the sacred beast left the temple for the princess wouldn't bode well for anyone. In that case, Honey's gonna get a ton more attention than she ever did before. It could help her standing, sure, but with her ice powers, it could also do more harm than good. Judging by Light's expression, Frederick realized the cat didn't see a problem with anything he said. However, Honey was also next in line for the throne, after Oswald and Christopher, and if her name gets tied to a divine creature, nobles with hidden agendas could exploit that. As her older brother, Frederick, was grateful for the cat's kindness towards his sister, but he didn't want to make things worse. Hoping for understanding, the emperor ordered Light to return to the temple right now. Realizing there was no other way out, the cat immediately vanished into thin air, leaving a golden trail behind. Looking at the leftover basket, Frederick wondered, did Light forget about it? Or was he refusing to give up? Summoning Charles, the emperor ordered him to take the basket back to the temple and make sure no rumors started. 2 weeks later, Frederick was back in his office, grinding through paperwork. Suddenly, a ginger cat materialized out of thin air and landed on his desk, giving the emperor a stern look. The emperor was hoping the beast had enough decency to get down on the floor immediately. Out of nowhere, the cat coughed up an envelope in front of Frederick, then promptly bailed off the desk. The letter was personally from Kelvin and completely covered in cat slobber. It said that the animal wouldn't be stubborn for no reason, and it would be better for him to stay in the palace. Hearing that after reading the letter, the emperor admitted defeat. Light was practically purring with delight, but his fur stood on end when he heard that Frederick had 2 conditions. The only way the cat stays is if he follows the rules. Otherwise, he's gotta go back. Light sat up tall, ears perked, ready to hear what His Highness had to say. Rule number 1. Nobody outside the royal family and your inner circle can know the sacred animals here. The second rule is even more important, so the emperor leaned in close to whisper it. After laying down the law, Frederick noticed the tiger's eyes get all serious. Light stepped forward, raised his head, and stared right into the emperor's eyes. Frederick took that as a sign the deal was done. Watching the cat calmly lick its paw, something struck the emperor as odd. Suddenly, Honey burst into the office, totally stoked to see Light. Frederick couldn't figure out what this divine animal saw in the girl. The heroine was stoked when she found out the tiger was staying at the palace. He was super persistent, but if things got weird, Frederick could just play dumb and ship the cat back. Honey never even dreamed Light would like her so much, and that they'd get to hang out all the time. The emperor couldn't help but smile, watching the 2 buddies promise to always get along. Now he figured it wasn't so strange that a divine being would be drawn to such a sweet kid. Plus, the princess just got herself one seriously badass bodyguard. A month later, when the first word came out about ice being found on top of Hern Mountain, the reaction was mostly negative. That's because the ice business was notorious for bankrupting dudes quick. But Christopher managed to become #1 in the market in just a month, thanks to steady supply and low prices. He also managed to even out the ice prices, no matter the season, and shut down the black market guys, all thanks to the Duke's connections. Sitting here with my brother in this gazebo, I felt like I was neither alive nor dead. Frederick knew that being in that kind of headspace had to make running a business a real nightmare. A little ways off, Melissa and the kids were hanging out on the lawn, laughing and yakking away. Christopher had already heard the buzz about the divine beast and wanted to see it, but it was probably napping somewhere. The emperor was sweating bullets about it at first, but now he realized he was stressing over nothing. They were hitting it off so well with Honey that the cat was ready to shower her with a whole basket of jewels. The Duke was totally baffled, wondering where the beast got them. Did it rob a priest or something? But as it turned out, all that loot actually belonged to it, which was weird, because you don't usually see divine temple creatures caring about human bling. But this cat was different, and would do anything to win the heroine's affection. So, the kids gave Light a new nickname, because his name was supposed to show how he felt about the god of light, right? When Christopher heard they were calling him Fluffy, he choked on his tea, almost went down for the count. I mean, yeah, the tiger was still a baby, for a divine beast anyway, but at the size of a house, Fluffy just didn't fit. Meanwhile, Melissa and the kids kept on laughing and chatting about everything and nothing. Honey was curious. Did her mistress want a boy or a girl? The Empress thought about it. She figured she would have wanted a daughter before, since she already had a son. But now she didn't care who it was, because Honey was like a real daughter to Melissa. That was so sweet. Steam practically shot out of the hero's ears, and she turned beet red, which made the Empress laugh. Oswald was sitting there with a real, honest-to-goodness happy look on his face, laughing along with everyone else. The Duke watched the boy closely, his mind racing, and decided he needed to have a little chat with him. Frederick was surprised he was picking up Oswald already, especially since he was planning on making more ice with Honey. But Christopher insisted that he absolutely had to take the Crown Prince today. Later, the Duke was helping him pack, chatting as they went. The kid was surprised his uncle was helping, knowing how tired he was. Suddenly, the Duke wondered if the prince felt bummed out, having to share everything with Honey. After all, before this, absolutely everything in the family had belonged only to him since birth. Thinking about it, the kid remembered hearing that question before, when Honey first moved into the palace. Back then, one of the maids wanted to know if Oswald was worried the princess would make him less loved in the family, but he was sure that just because Mom and Dad loved the girl didn't mean they'd love him any less. The Crown Prince never thought he was sharing anything with her, but rather, they were both getting enough love together. And that wasn't just about him and Honey, but also about their unborn kid. Oswald thought his uncle was overreacting, but Christopher was straight up shell-shocked. After a chuckle, he realized he'd gotten to know his nephew a little better today. He grabbed Oswald and started squeezing him, which totally threw the kid for a loop. And when he called the boy his baby, Oswald was completely stunned, since Frederick and Melissa were his parents. Standing behind the door, Honey heard that Christopher considered his brother's kid his own. She'd planned to come early with an ice pack, but now everything had taken a wild turn. The Crown Prince had no idea how much strength his genuine love gave the girl. And even though she was still scared and uncertain, the boy's vibrant spirit allowed her to move forward, even from the shadows. Honey hoped that the baby who was about to be born would also get so much love. The next day, Melissa looked up from her magazine, ready to say something to the princess. But to her surprise, the kid was totally zonked out, slumped back in her chair, fast asleep. Hearing the Empress's voice, the girl instantly bolted upright, pretending like she hadn't been sleeping at all. Melissa suggested canceling lessons so she could rest, but Honey was super eager to study. Apologizing for the trouble, our girl hurried off to her class. Watching the princess go, Melissa figured she probably felt sick because of the changing seasons, and got seriously worried about her and the prince. So, she decided to write a letter to Christopher and brew some medicinal tea for the kids. It felt like summer was flying by this year, maybe because of all the crazy stuff happening. The Empress believed that this year would definitely be etched in their memories forever. Meanwhile, someone in a dark cloak stood across from the palace entrance, watching everything unfold. Melissa lay on the floor of the dimly lit room, barely able to breathe. Agnes arrived just in time, neutralized the poison, and saved the Empress. But the baby inside her was gone. This news hit the heroine like a freight train, filling her with utter despair and terror. Eleanor, like some kind of monster, clutched the baby's body, letting out this creepy-ass laugh. The woman couldn't believe how a twisted freak like Honey could even think she deserved to be happy. At that moment, the girl woke up in a cold sweat, her whole body shaking with fear. Gasping for air, she slowly started to shake off the nightmare she just saw. She couldn't get any decent sleep again tonight and wearily rubbed her eyes. Just because Eleanor was dead didn't mean this was over. The woman's accomplice, the one who helped her poison the Empress, was still in the palace. The thing was, the poor kid didn't know a damn thing about him. Her head was a total mess, so she decided to step outside and get some fresh air. It was the dead of night, and when she heard a noise nearby, she got spooked. That's when she saw some dude staring at the palace, wearing a dark cloak. The cloak had this ram skull design on the back, which just made him look even creepier. Something clicked, and Honey collapsed, frozen in absolute terror, because she'd seen that exact cloak before, right before she went back in time. Back then, she was wandering around the palace where she lived with her mom, looking for something to eat. Suddenly, she saw a guy in that cloak down the hall, talking to Eleanor. She overheard them saying they were working on something, and the woman agreed to wait a little longer. Right then, the girl was hiding behind a nearby dresser, totally clueless about who this was and what was up with that robe. Now it was happening again, same time, same outfit, and this dude's behavior was super sus. The heroine was pretty damn sure this was the same accomplice as that Eleanor chick. but from that distance, there was no way to make out a face, especially since he had his back turned. Looking at the skirt, it seemed like it was one of the servants. Sitting down in the grass and sighing sadly, Honey wished she knew more. She felt it was her duty to expose the identity of the guy in the robe and protect Lady Melissa. Suddenly, Pufik showed up, and the heroine stared intently at him. She had the idea to send the cat to the Empress as a personal guard. The girl hoped the divine beast would fulfill her request, because only he could protect her mistress discreetly. The cat meowed like, "Yeah!" and the kid thanked it before letting it go. Boom! Just like that, it vanished into thin air, leaving behind this golden glow. Suddenly, the girl hears this freaky noise behind her, leaves rustling and stuff. She totally freaked out, realizing someone else was coming this way. So she ducks for cover, peeking out, trying to see who's gonna pop out of the woods. Out walks another person in a dark cloak. But this one's plain, no designs. Thinking it's just another one of Eleanor's goons, she tries to get a good look at his face. When she sees it's just a little kid, Honey's like, "Whoa!" In that instant, she realizes she's been totally spotted. Seeing the kid has bright red hair, it suddenly clicks for our girl. The hero was totally blown away to run into his sister all the way out here. Honey stood up from behind cover, looking at him like, "What the hell?" Zrania, just as surprised to see Terence, even though the last emperor had a grown-up wife. Constance, with 2 kids, he still took on 2 more wives. When he kicked the bucket, he left behind 4 kids, including Hani from Eleanor, and Terence from his second wife. And now, out of nowhere, our girl bumps into the former little prince. She couldn't figure out what brought the boy out here, since his family basically never left the palace. Terence thought about it, then decided there was no way he could tell his sis, especially since the princess was rocking pajamas, not to mention house slippers. If our girl was going to be a royal, she needed to start acting like one. Henny was floored by his nerve, not getting how he could look down on people like that. She confessed she just came out to get some fresh air and ended up here. After that, an awkward silence hung in the air, making the girl uneasy. Realizing she probably didn't have anything else to say, Terence turned and started to leave. The princess knew it was about a 40-minute walk back to their palace. That meant the kid was holding something back. And was his family involved in the poisoning too? The next morning, the kid was standing by the window, replaying last night's events, then headed to Melissa. Terence's sudden visit bothered her, but right now, protecting the Empress was the priority. Figuring the culprit could be one of the maids, Honey suddenly ran into some servants in the hallway. The girls were carrying some boxes and didn't understand why the princess was there at this hour. The heroine stared intently at the maids, who smiled sweetly back at her. The kid didn't know much about them, except one of the maids had been serving the Empress for ages. Seeing her serious little face, the girls figured Her Highness must have something important to say. They thought Honey was in her pajamas, because her staff wasn't doing their job, but the little girl set them straight. She just had a nightmare about her mom, and wanted to see Lady Melissa as soon as possible. Touched by what they heard, the maids decided to split up. One to escort the young princess, the other to get the meds. Honey was super surprised to hear their boxes had medicine Christopher sent at the Empress's request. Hearing the Duke's name, the little one froze in terror, her mind racing with possibilities. Now, if she wasn't careful, the bad guys might even try to frame Christopher. After that, she rushed to the Empress as fast as her little legs could carry her. Melissa wasn't expecting such an early visit from the little princess, and was totally caught off guard. "Morning, Your Majesty," the girl said, happy to see her looking so strong and healthy. The Empress was curious. What brought her here so early in the morning? Looking all sad, the little girl confessed she'd had a terrible nightmare. That's why she wanted to be with Melissa, which made her jump up and rush over to the kid. Holding the girl tight, the Empress tried to chase away all the scary thoughts from her dream, because she believed it was just a dream, and it would never come true. Just then, Hani remembered Melissa's body lying on the floor, almost lifeless, but she trusted that, like the Empress said, the dream wouldn't become reality. The Empress ordered the servants to tell the princess's palace where she was, bring her some clothes, and make breakfast. And she also wanted the maids to prepare a medicinal tea to drink after the meal. Turns out, this tonic was actually for the little one, just a health booster. The heroine was floored. If the medicine wasn't for her, what was up with the poison then? When she learned some of the medicine was for Oswald too, Honey got scared that he was sick. But Melissa figured, hey, a little extra immunity boost wouldn't hurt him either. After all, the kid had some serious power, which totally blew the little girl's mind. He was super weak when he was born, but then he started getting better, and now he's doing great. But Melissa's still worried, like any parent would, and showed Honey the same kind of care. So she hoped that even if the potion tasted nasty, the girl would suck it up for a bit. After that, the princess stayed with Melissa, waiting for the servants to bring her a change of clothes. She was stoked to be spending the whole day with the Empress. No chance to search the kitchen now. so all I could do was stick close and stay sharp. Soon after, two maids showed up together, which surprised the Empress a little. One of them, the one who'd worked for the Empress the longest, had already filled in the kitchen, and breakfast was almost ready. Melissa was grateful and happy things were going smoothly. But one thing was bugging the girls. They'd been debating whether to tell the Empress, but finally decided to spill the beans. Apparently, the third maid was having some trouble, 'cause she'd been walking around with a gloomy face. The other servants couldn't get anything out of her, so Melissa decided to give her some personal attention. The girls also remembered that this maid had been sneaking out somewhere at night. They knew because her coat wasn't where it was supposed to be at that time. The little one freaked, thinking that the person in the robe had to be her. Out of nowhere, there's a knock at the door. And wouldn't you know it, it's the maid we were just talking about. All right, everyone's here. The two ladies head into the dining room and take their seats. First things first, a couple of waiters bring out some pickled mushrooms as a little appetizer. Our girl's sitting there, totally tense, just waiting for the poisoning to go down. But the food's fine, and the Empress and Princess dig in. Now, looking at that mopey maid they mentioned earlier, it's obvious something's up with her. But seriously, could someone about to commit murder really be this freaked out? Suddenly, our heroine catches a death glare from the servant who's been working for Melissa the longest. Right then and there, just from that look, the girl's hand starts shaking like crazy, making it impossible to use her silverware. The Empress, meanwhile, is peacefully eating breakfast, totally clueless about what's going on. Out of nowhere, the Empress grabs a glass of water, and that just made Honey even more tense. That's when the girl remembered the poison was in the cup with the hot drink. She had to do something, fast. But unfortunately, she couldn't get word to His Majesty about any of it. Just then, one of the maids brought in a tray with 2 cups of herbal tea on it. Melissa only asked for one, but the guy who gave the tea to the maid figured the unborn kid could use a health boost too. The Empress thought that was pretty sweet of the girl and happily agreed. Honey was glued to the maid as she set both cups on the table, suspecting it was her. But the girl was blown away, because this was the same maid who'd been working for her mistress for over 10 years. Testing the temperature of the drink with a probe, the maid suggested the kid do the same. Agreeing, our girl noticed how the maid was carefully watching every single thing she did. Pulling out the dipstick, she accidentally bumped the cup, knocking it over and spilling everything. Honey started apologizing, but Melissa calmed her down, saying the important thing was it didn't get on her clothes. Then, she asked the maid to make another batch of the concoction, which the girl happily agreed to do with a smile. After she left, our girl finally had a little time to somehow get the word out to His Majesty. First things first, she opened the window and summoned her pet, hoping he could help. Giving his snout a little rub, she was just glad that Fluffy was safe and hoped he was doing okay. She decided to send a letter to the Emperor through him, but there wasn't any paper nearby. Left with no choice, our heroine wrote the letter right there on a serving napkin. Now, the cat needed to bolt to His Majesty and deliver the message as soon as possible. The moment he vanished, one of the maids came in wanting to get Her Majesty changed. So, there was this girl, Fedora, and people were saying she'd been walking around with a real gloomy face lately. After getting Lady Honey changed into a dress, she asked her to stick around for a sec, said she had something to say. But then, she just froze up, like she couldn't get the words out, you know? Clutching her own hand, Fedora just stared at the floor, her face totally desperate. That's when the girl decided to just ask straight up if she knew there was something in the herbal tea. Right after that, the maid's face went all kinds of horrified, and she broke out in a cold sweat. Turns out, she wasn't the one who did it, 'cause she swore she'd never do something like that. Fedora confessed that there was poison in the tea, which totally stunned our girl. The girl felt really bad, and you could tell someone was forcing the maid to be a part of it. Now wasn't the time, but later, the girl was hoping to get the full story from her, and Honey was seriously grateful to the girl for her guts, and for coming clean. Thanks to her, the princess was now totally convinced, and booked it back to the Empress. Back inside, the kid was torn like, should she spill everything now and beg for help? Just then, Melissa was chilling across from our girl, casually flipping through a magazine. Henny decided not to drop the bomb right away. She didn't want to just throw it out there. Eventually, the truth would come out, and the little one just hoped it wouldn't crush her. Seeing the maid come back in with a tray, our girl decided to wait for the right moment. After checking the temperature, the maid offered them drinks, but Honey suddenly passed. She asked for the tea to cool down a bit more, which the Empress found kind of funny, so Melissa decided to try it first. But suddenly, the princess screamed, jumping to her feet. The maid and Empress stared at her, totally thrown by her reaction. Not wanting to wait any longer, she pulled a silver pocket watch out of her pocket. Then, she started dunking it like crazy in the cup of herbal tea, hoping the silver would react if there was poison. Melissa looked over at the maid, totally confused. The maid's face was like a brick wall. Right then, the maid started getting suspicious about the little girl. Henny pulled the watch out of the cup, and to her surprise, it was totally fine. The maid laughed, figuring the princess was just having another nightmare. But out of nowhere, the girl asked the maid to hand her a handkerchief. The maid didn't get why, but the heroine suddenly started pushing the issue. Henny knew testing for poison that way was completely pointless. The maid must have messed with the spot where the cup touches your lips. After wiping the cup with a handkerchief, then the watch, they started turning black right before my eyes. So it was a stone-cold fact the cup was poisoned, and the little girl's eyes snapped to the Empress. Melissa's face went dark with horror, and she couldn't tear her eyes off the watch. Right then and there, the maid grabbed Honey's arm, yanking her with all her might. Then, she threw the little girl to the floor, which made the Empress jump up. The maid was furious, not understanding how this little runt figured it out. Hiking up her skirt, the girl snatched a knife strapped to her leg, apologizing to the Empress beforehand. Melissa looked at the maid in shock, the one who'd worked for her the longest, refusing to believe what was happening. The maid screamed, because she never wanted things to go this far. The heroine knew it was way too late to stop the killer, and the guards were still MIA. Her only play was to use the kid's ice powers. There was no other option, so she started focusing her ice magic in her hand. Then, she conjured up an ice ball, ready to freeze the psycho solid. Just then, the door burst open, and knights flooded in, led by Captain Drake. The maid was ordered to drop the weapon immediately and put her hands in the air. Figuring she was still a threat, the little girl suddenly ran up and shoved her. Caught off guard, the woman face planted on the floor, and the knife clattered from her grip. She glared at the heroine, absolutely enraged by this brat. But in that instant, a bunch of knightly blades lunged straight at the killer, pinning her down. The Empress stared, totally lost, at the handmaiden who used to be her most loyal. Honey and Melissa watched the knights drag away the criminal, who started screaming and thrashing like a maniac. Just then, the Emperor burst in, his eyes wide with fear as he looked at the Empress and Princess. First things first, he needed to make sure the girls weren't hurt. Seeing they were safe and sound, Frederick pulled his wife and little sister into a tight hug. Now, the Empress couldn't stay in this palace. She needed to get to a healer, ASAP. Honey shifted uncomfortably, wanting to tell the Emperor something. But suddenly, Melissa cut her off mid-sentence, pulling her into a big, gentle hug. The Empress had a ton of questions too, but she knew the little one just wanted to protect her. So, even though Honey's actions were reckless, the Empress was grateful for her courage and for saving her life. The heroine was glad the killer was taken care of, but right now, she was feeling major tension from the Emperor. Suddenly, Frederick decided it was the princess's turn, and that sent a shiver down her spine. He couldn't figure out how she knew who was guilty, that it was poison, and why she went rogue on this. Then, the heroine asked if the Emperor knew she'd been falling asleep everywhere lately. Frederick nodded, thinking it was from the fever, but turns out that was just a cover. I mean, the girl could have just said she'd been having nightmares every night, where Melissa was passing out from poison. That's also why she went for a walk at night, to calm her nerves. Plus, she thought her feelings were just a coincidence, and she wrote everything else in a letter. Honey didn't deny her actions, but she wanted to come straight to the Emperor as soon as she found a lead on the culprit. At first, she thought it was just a bad dream. Then she started suspecting the maids, and then she noticed a lot of weird stuff. We couldn't move fast because that maid was always lurking, so the kid decided to send a letter instead. But the maid still managed to whip up that potion, so our girl had to stop her. Henny started sobbing, realizing how much danger she'd put the Empress in. But Frederick didn't want her blaming herself, and Melissa was grateful to her too. Things could have gone seriously south, so the Emperor personally thanked her. To his surprise, the girl said she didn't want to hear stuff like that anymore. She was just protecting her family that she loved, not fishing for compliments. Impressed by her words, Frederick apologized and promised not to bring it up again. Knowing the little one had a tough time pulling all this off solo, he told her to get some rest. Meanwhile, the knights showed up with intel. They found evidence in the kitchen. The Emperor figured this wasn't for a kid to hear, so he told Drake to take the girl away. Agnes showed up in the kitchen later, and after analyzing the poison, she found out the symptoms only kicked in after an incubation period. It's got no color, no smell, and no obvious symptoms that set it apart from other poisons. If the Empress had swallowed that stuff, neither she nor anyone else would have even known she was poisoned. There'd be no evidence left, so even Agnes couldn't have detected the poison, and there'd be nothing she could do about it. After that, a heavy silence hung in the air for a few seconds. Frederick realized that if this poison was that undetectable, it could already be anywhere in the palace. That meant they had to lock down the palace and evacuate the imperial family as soon as possible. But Agnes and Drake also knew that some random servant couldn't have gotten their hands on that kind of poison alone. And what if the real target wasn't just Melissa, but the entire imperial family? Meanwhile, Viola was in the palace greeting the lady, already clued in on what went down. Now, she just wanted the heroine to change clothes ASAP and get some serious rest from everything. Just then, the servants announced that Fedora had arrived to see the princess. A maid glanced nervously at Viola, wanting to tell Honey something. Then, out of nowhere, she dropped to her knees and bowed to the floor, totally throwing the girls off. The maid never imagined that woman would threaten Lady Melissa. She also knew this was a deadly sin, one that couldn't be forgiven. But Fedora's younger kids were innocent, and she begged for them to be protected. The princess wasn't trying to grill her. She just wanted to hear everything she knew. Turns out, Fedora was just an observer, and if everything failed, she was supposed to do the hit herself. She didn't want this at all, but her father just didn't give the girl any other choice. The maid who tried to poison the mistress didn't know about Fedor, or even who was behind it. Honey guessed it could be Terrence's family, which froze the maid in terror. But she didn't want to say anything, knowing the little princess might not be able to handle it. Right then, Honey remembered when she was just a young and helpless princess. No matter what, the kid promised to protect Fedor's brothers and sisters, asking in return that everything be reported to the emperor. The girl was extremely grateful to the princess for the trust and for listening. The next day, Frederick ordered the palace locked down, and the entire royal family evacuated. Melissa, Oswald, and Constance immediately headed for the family's remote mansion. After that, an investigation immediately started among the palace staff. Since Hani was a key witness, the emperor decided to hold her back for a quick chat. He really wanted to know how this little kid figured out who the culprit was. See, the maid was checking the princess's hands, making sure she was right-handed. The second we walked in, she prepped the medicine in a mug with a handle, and that's when Hani got it. The killer planned to take advantage of the fact that the empress held her cup with her left hand, not her right. The potion itself wasn't poisoned, but the maid was watching to see which side of her mouth Melissa used to drink. The mug was still on the table, and Honey pointed right to the spot where the poison was. Our girl didn't check, but she was sure the same thing could happen with the other cups too. That's all the princess knew, and the emperor asked Captain Drake to verify the info. Before long, everything she said checked out, which totally blew Frederick's mind. He knew Honey was smart, sure, but he had no freaking clue just how smart. Thinking she got it all from him, the emperor patted the kid on the head. Seeing Drake snicker at that, Frederick was like, "What's with the captain's cocky grin?" On top of everything, it was messed up that the poison was found in a box Christopher sent. Looks like the perp didn't just want to frame the Duke, but use the kid to throw everyone off their scent. Assuming Melissa took the poison, and Honey didn't know anything, then the suspect list just blew up. That maid would be suspect number 1, but the princess would clear her name right away. She'd swear she didn't pour any poison, and Honey would back her up, which is why she had the kid taste it first. Out of nowhere, the little one decided to drop another major bombshell on Frederick. The emperor was floored, trying to figure out where his little sister got all this intel from. So, our girl laid everything out for the emperor, every single detail about Fedora. Frederick appreciated the info, but he was seriously worried about how deep the kid was involved. If all this checks out, whoever's pulling the strings is basically running this whole area. First things first, they gotta get to Fedora, figure out what she knows. It was clear this was heavy, but now the emperor was gonna be extra cautious. I mean, he was still reeling from yesterday, when the perp dropped the name of the mastermind. To Honey's shock, the mastermind turned out to be her own mom, Eleanor, which totally froze her in place. But since Eleanor was dead, she probably couldn't be directly involved, though maybe she was still somehow connected. The heroine realized that, unlike the poison her mother got, this one was different, meaning someone else had to get it. Just then, Honey remembered that random run-in with Terrence in the woods at night. They searched the killer's room and found proof of the deal. Now we just gotta figure out the connection to Eleanor. We gotta tread carefully. Until we nail the culprit, the emperors decided to punish the woman's family in the meantime. The kid was scared Eleanor might have acted alone, but Frederick was sure they were in on it too. Her family were broke-ass aristocrats, scraping by on their measly fortune. After Eleanor died, their connection to the emperor was cut, and they started dabbling in shady dealings. The emperor turned a blind eye to it all this time, but it was time to bring them to justice. Frederick knew this kind of news could mess with Honey, so he wanted her to head to the estate first thing tomorrow. The next day, the emperor sentenced the killer to death and stripped Eleanor's family of their status, seizing all their assets. Another day later, when the news broke, the whole damn empire lost its mind. Frederick stared at the crazy headlines, totally thrown for a loop. Just like he figured, public opinion on Hani was in the toilet, so shipping her off to the estate was the only move. Packing her stuff, Viola couldn't wrap her head around why a princess who saved the empress's life had to run. But Hani was cool with it, since her family was at the estate. Plus, The area where the estate was located was famous for its killer scenery. Looking at the maid, the heroine had no clue the kind of shock Melissa was going through, getting betrayed by her closest servant. When the carriage was ready, the bags were packed, and the girls started to get in. Drake suddenly knocked. The captain's face was etched with horror, which freaked both of the girls out. First thing he did was make sure the little one was okay, especially after last night. Drake breathed a sigh of relief, hearing that Hani made it back to her room safe and sound after yesterday's meeting. To the princess's horror, it turned out that Fedora had straight up vanished last night. She was arrested as a suspect, waiting for questioning. But when they went to see her in the morning, the maid was gone without a trace. Now they're searching high and low for her. And since Hani was the last one to see her before the arrest, Drake decided to come here. The emperor even called in Fedora's father because of this, suspecting her family might be involved in the escape. The kids convinced the maid didn't disappear on her own, which made Drake let out a heavy sigh. He was also thinking that the real client eliminated Fedora to cover their tracks. After the conversation, the captain rushed to send the heroine back to the estate, escorted by knights. The girl was wondering if this was exactly what Fedora was afraid of, or if she really just ran away. Arriving at the estate, Hani was curious about what everyone was up to so late at night. Charles, who the heroine hadn't seen in ages, met them near a map, and she wanted to know where everyone else was. The head butler apologized for what he was about to say, and as it turned out, Lady Melissa had a miscarriage. Hani froze, eyes wide, and Viola covered her face in horror. This all happened so fast, and His Highness is due to arrive any minute now. Snatching her hand from Viola's, the girl bolted toward the mansion. But then, her strength gave out, and she slumped down on the road, completely devastated. Charles personally escorted the girls inside, into an atmosphere of mournful silence. Entering the room, they saw Agnes, Constance, Oswald, and Christopher standing around Melissa's bed. The Empress lay there with her eyes closed, her usually radiant face paler than ever. The Emperor's mother pulled Hani and Oswald close, wrapping her arms around them. The medic did all she could, easing the abdominal pain and stopping the bleeding. Constance didn't get it. Agnes had just assured her that Melissa and the baby were fine. Now, the miscarriage could have been caused by all the stress she's been under. Though sometimes it just happens, you know? All the healer was sure of, though, was that the poison had absolutely nothing to do with it.